Hello everyone, I am MANO Scaling, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, and also tell me where you are from and what time you are watching. Now get comfortable and relax. My name is Ethan Caldwell. I'm 29 years old, and this happened in October 2022. I'm writing it down because I need someone, anyone, to believe me, even if it sounds impossible. I've replayed these events in my mind 1,000 times, and each time they feel no less real, no less horrifying. Maybe the mere act of describing them will help, or maybe it won't. I live in Birmingham, Alabama, and I work as a software engineer. I spend most days hunched over a desk, squinting at lines of code. It's not a bad life, but it can get stale. About a year ago, I decided I wanted to push myself out of my comfort zone and explore the outdoors. I read a bunch of survival guides and watched hours of bushcraft videos on YouTube. I bought the best gear I could afford and started taking weekend camping trips in local parks. Chaha State Park, in the eastern part of the state, fascinated me the most. It's the home of Alabama's highest point, Mount Chaha, part of the vast Talladega National Forest. Something about those rugged trails and whispering pine forests sparked a sense of excitement in me. I loved the idea that just a few hours from the hustle of city life, I could vanish into near wilderness. When October came around, with cooler nights and the promise of stunning fall foliage, I decided to spend an entire week in Chaha State Park. Not just near the popular campsites or the more manicured spots, but deep in the backcountry, away from well-traveled trails and crowds. The plan was simple. I'd hike in with my Belgian Malinois. Duke, set up a base camp and immerse myself in nature. Off-grid, no people around, just me and my dog. I wanted quiet, solitude, and a chance to prove I could handle genuine wilderness. Duke was more than just a pet. He was my closest companion. Athletic, loyal, and incredibly intelligent. I'd adopted him from a local shelter about 2 years prior. They told me he was too energetic for most families, but for a person itching to explore the outdoors, he was perfect. I'd taken him on every smaller trip and he thrived in the wild, bounding through the brush and scouting for squirrels or raccoons. This time would be our biggest challenge yet. I arrived at Chaha around midday on a Wednesday. The weather forecast promised mild days and cool nights. Clear skies, a waxing moon, ideal conditions for camping. I parked my car at a remote trailhead, hoisted my heavy pack over my shoulders, and clipped Duke's harness to my belt. The first few hours of our hike were uneventful but pleasant. Crisp air, light breeze, and the sun flickering through tall pines. Leaves crunched underfoot, and Duke occasionally stopped to sniff a tuft of grass or bark at the sound of a distant woodpecker. We made it to a secluded clearing before sundown. The place was remarkable. Thick, old-growth pines forming a gentle ring, with a level patch of ground for the tent. From what I could tell on the map, a small spring should have been nearby, and I wanted to check that for water. I set my pack down and dug out my map and compass to confirm. That's when the first hint of strangeness tickled my senses. The map didn't quite match the landscape. At first, I chalked it up to user error. Maybe I hadn't oriented the map correctly. I tried using my phone's GPS as a backup, but it wouldn't lock onto a signal. It kept circling around searching, which was odd because I'd had at least some coverage on previous trips, even if it was weak. After fiddling with it for a few minutes, I let out a frustrated sigh. The sun was sinking, and I figured I could sort out the navigational quirks later. It wouldn't be the first time technology failed me in the backcountry. I set up my tent and lit a small fire. The fire crackled contentedly at first, warming my hands as I fed it twigs and pine cones. Duke settled at my side, panting happily. The smell of burning wood and the hush of the surrounding forest brought a smile to my face. For dinner, I had dehydrated meals that only needed hot water. I boiled a pot of water, poured it in, and waited. But as dusk deepened, the fire became fickle. The flames flickered out repeatedly, leaving a sudden coldness in the air. Puzzled, I tried again. More tinder, careful arrangement of kindling, shelter from the wind. The fire roared up, then sputtered out in less than a minute, as though an invisible hand pinched it closed. I'd never seen anything like that. But after a stubborn 40 minutes of attempts, I managed to keep it alive with an abnormal level of effort. I slept fitfully that night, my mind swirling with illusions of footsteps in the woods and the wind whispering my name. It was only day one. Possibly, I told myself, it was just my imagination heightened by being alone. I woke once around midnight to Duke's low growl. When I peered through the mesh of my tent, I saw only darkness. The forest was utterly silent. No rustle of leaves or chirping insects. Despite the eerie hush, I drifted back to sleep eventually. Morning brought more troubles. My sleeping bag was unzipped and rolled halfway out of the tent door. I was baffled. I always zip it up fully, particularly in fall, to keep warm. Duke looked at me like he was confused too. But Duke never messes with the gear. He knows better. Maybe I was sleepwalking? I had no history of it, but that's the only rational explanation I could conjure. Over breakfast, I discovered my water had turned a strange yellow-brown color overnight. The plastic containers I'd filled the evening before were sealed tightly, but now they looked like they'd been dipped in mud. The odor was pungent. Disgusted, I tossed what I could, but that left me with only a day's worth of fresh water. I decided I'd search for the spring I'd seen on the map, or that should have been on the map. If I couldn't find it, I'd backtrack and refill near the main creek 2 miles east. Annoying, but not catastrophic. So I packed up my gear and walked deeper into the forest, following the compass in what I thought was the correct direction. Duke bounded beside me, occasionally pausing and sniffing the air. I've learned to watch him for cues. If there's a bear, snake, or any unusual presence, he'll tense up. Several times he halted, ears straight up, tail rigid, but then he'd relax as if whatever he sensed vanished. 2 hours of trudging through undergrowth, and I stumbled upon a small clearing with an ancient, crumbling rock formation in its center. It looked somewhat man-made, as if someone had built a stone altar ages ago. Moss covered every inch, thick and dark green. In the middle of the formation was a circle of blackened stones like a long-dead campfire. But what truly unsettled me was the feeling that I'd been there before, only I knew I hadn't. I scanned my map again. No mention of any ruins or old fire rings in this sector, and though I'd walked more or less east, the compass needle spun oddly at times. My phone was dead by now, so that was no help. Duke began pacing the perimeter, sniffing at the rocks. I walked to the center to get a better look, maybe find some sign of who'd built it or used it. My footsteps echoed, as if the ground beneath was hollow. I knelt and pressed my ear to the stone. A faint scraping noise, like something moving far below. A sudden wave of cold dread washed over me. My stomach lurched, telling me to leave. Not just the clearing, but the park altogether. A primal fear, like a voice in my head, whispered, "Go." I didn't leave, though. I'd promised myself a full trip, and I wasn't about to quit on day 2. Plus, I needed water. I took a moment to gather my bearings again. The map was starting to look like nonsense, the lines not matching any topography I'd just hiked. Even so, I marked the spot on the paper for reference, though I wasn't sure how accurate that would be. When I finally found a trickle of running water, the sun was already slipping behind thick clouds. Evening would be on me soon. I checked my watch. It read 2:13 p.m. Then I glanced at the position of the sun, which looked more like late afternoon, maybe 4 o'clock or 5 p.m. Confused, I assumed my watch must have gotten damaged, but it was brand new. I tapped its face, scrolled through its settings, but it was all normal. I shook my head and told myself I'd rely on the daylight to gauge time. I filled my canteens from the stream, then set up camp a safe distance away. I didn't like the idea of sleeping right next to the water source, as it might draw animals, and I already felt uneasy enough. This time, I chose a relatively open spot beneath a large pine, hoping to keep my bearings if something odd happened again. Darkness closed in quickly, and the forest fell silent. No chirping crickets, no hooting owls. Nothing. If it weren't for the faint rustling of tree branches high above, I could have believed I was in a soundproof room. I built another fire. It caught quickly this time, which was a small relief. For dinner, I opened one of my sealed meals, only to discover it had turned into a foul-smelling sludge. Every single packet I checked was the same. There was no rational reason. The packaging was intact, not expired. But everything had rotted overnight. Furious, I tossed the rancid food aside. I had maybe 2 energy bars that were still okay and a small bag of trail mix. That was it for the rest of the trip. Duke sat at my side, ears back and tail low. He wouldn't eat his dog kibble, sniffing it, then whining. I tried to reassure him it was fine, but he only paced nervously around camp, occasionally letting out quiet whimpers. Normally, he's a confident, even bold dog. Something about this place was breaking him down. And then I noticed a figure in the trees, just at the edge of the firelight. A man leaning against a trunk, arms crossed, watching us. My heart lurched. Had he been standing there long? Why hadn't Duke barked? Slowly, I stood and called out, "Hey, are you okay?" I tried to keep my voice steady. The man stepped forward, revealing himself in the glow of the flames. He wore tattered outdoor gear, a large knife strapped to his belt, and a heavy canvas pack on his shoulders. "I was about to ask you the same thing," he said, voice raspy. "You shouldn't be out here alone." He glanced at Duke, then back to me. "I'm Mason. Mason Pierce." I introduced myself, relieved to see another human being, but wary of how he'd suddenly appeared. He told me he'd been out here for a while, a survivalist by choice. Something about his demeanor, the intensity in his eyes, put me on edge, but I tried to remain polite. I asked if he needed anything. "You got any water left?" he asked. I offered him one of my canteens, and he gulped it down with disturbing urgency. "Appreciate it," he said, wiping his mouth. Then he pointed to my rotting food packages strewn about. "This place'll do that to you." "What do you mean?" I asked, the words catching in my throat. He just shook his head. "Odd things happen in these woods. Things that you can't quite explain." I wanted to ask him more, but he squatted by my fire, glaring into the flames. Duke sniffed around him, unsettled. We ended up sharing the fire for the evening. Mason mentioned being on the move constantly, as if something was chasing him. But every time I pressed him for details, he clammed up. When I asked how long he'd been out there, he shrugged. "A while," he muttered. "Long enough to see things I wish I hadn't." He looked at me. "Don't get too comfortable, Ethan. You see footprints out here sometimes that look a lot like yours. The forest can play tricks on you." The cryptic warning sent a chill through me. I tried to chalk it up to an eccentric who spent too many nights alone. Still, I set up my tent carefully, double-checking every zipper. Duke curled up right next to me as I slid into my sleeping bag. With another person around, I should have felt safer, but I didn't. I woke before sunrise to find Mason missing. He'd slipped off quietly, leaving no trace of his presence save for footprints near the fire pit. Duke bristled at them, sniffing the ash and dirt, letting out a low, mournful whine. I noticed something even more unsettling. My footprints were all over the campsite, but some pointed in directions I swear I never walked. I tried to see if any matched my boots exactly, but it was impossible to be sure. Everything looked jumbled. At this point, I figured I'd push deeper into the forest, maybe circle around to a known trail or vantage point. I'd read about a cluster of scenic overlooks to the south, near a portion of the Pinhoti Trail. From there, I might spot a recognizable mountain ridge and realign the map. I hiked all morning, and Duke's tension never eased. He'd stop and stare intently into the trees, growling at something I couldn't see. Sometimes, I thought I heard footsteps mirroring ours, stopping when we stopped, moving when we moved. The only time I felt any sense of normalcy was when the sun bathed us in golden light. But midday crept by, and the forest canopy thickened as I followed the ridgeline. At around what I believed was 2 o'clock or 3 p.m., I bumped straight into Mason again. Only this time, he stepped out from behind a wide oak tree, as if waiting for me. Duke barked, hackles raised. I tensed, gripping the trekking pole in my hand like a weapon. Mason raised his hands in mock surrender. "Easy there. Didn't mean to spook you." "How'd you get ahead of me?" I asked, my voice trembling. I had been moving in a constant direction, and he'd gone the opposite way earlier. "I was following you," he said, eyes glinting with an eerie curiosity. "For a little while, anyway. Wanted to make sure you were all right." I swallowed hard. "I'm fine," I lied. "Just trying to find a vantage point. My supplies went bad. I need a better route out." He studied me, then nodded. "Come with me. I know a spot where you can see most of the valley. Maybe you'll figure out which way you need to go." Against my better judgment, I followed him, partially because I had no one else to rely on, and partly because I hoped he'd genuinely help me find a way back to the main trails. We walked for an hour or so, passing through a ravine strewn with boulders, scaling up a slope thick with brambles, eventually arriving at a rock outcropping. The view should have been magnificent. Rolling hills, dense forests, the occasional peak. But in the distance, black storm clouds gathered. The wind picked up, and everything looked slightly off. The angles, the shapes of the hills, they seemed warped. "Something's not right out there," Mason mumbled, scanning the horizon. "Look close." He handed me a small monocular. Through it, I noticed what might have been a road far off, but it flickered, as if vanishing when I focused on it. My heart thundered in my chest. I was miles away from any known landmark, and the terrain itself seemed to shift like an illusion. I felt Duke pressing against my leg, and that comforted me a little. When I turned to thank Mason for bringing me here, he was staring at me with an expression that bordered on hunger. It was the first time I noticed just how pale he was, how sunken his eyes looked, and how the skin on his left cheek had a waxy quality, like a burn scar that didn't quite heal. "I found something of yours," he said, pulling a black jacket from his pack. My jacket, or at least an exact copy of it, down to the brand logo and a tear in the sleeve. Figured I'd bring it to you. I felt a cold rush of fear. I'd never taken that jacket off. It was still strapped to my pack as far as I remembered. Panicked, I spun around, rummaging through my gear. Sure enough, my jacket was missing. The strap that held it was undone. I had no clue how or when it might have fallen off. "Where did you find it?" I demanded. "About half a mile back. Saw it stuck in a tree branch." He grinned in a way that made my stomach churn. "I thought maybe you left it there, but then I remembered you wearing it. Strange, right?" "Strange," I echoed, not knowing what else to say. He walked toward me, extending the jacket. As I reached for it, I caught a glimpse of the inside lining. It looked damp, stained with something dark red. I jerked my hand away. "What is that?" Mason shrugged. "Blood, I guess." I wanted to run, but I forced myself to remain calm. "It's not mine," I said, backing away. He shrugged again. "Maybe not. Could belong to something else." Before I could press him, he stuffed the jacket back into his pack, as though uninterested in the subject. "Let's move," he said. "Storm's coming." We made our way down from the outcropping, but I could barely focus on my footing. My mind swirled with questions. How had he found my jacket? What had bled on it? Why hadn't I noticed losing it? And why did everything in these woods feel so wrong? It started raining lightly, a cold drizzle that turned the forest floor slick with mud. The temperature dropped precipitously. By the time we reached a small depression by a rocky ledge, the drizzle had become a steady downpour. Mason suggested we find shelter for the night. I glanced at my watch, 1:07 p.m., but the sky was nearly dark, more like late evening. Confused, I tried to set my watch again, certain it was malfunctioning, but the hands refused to move when I turned the dial. We formed a makeshift camp. The rocky ledge provided some cover from the rain, but the area was cramped and claustrophobic. Duke wouldn't settle, barking at shadows that flickered at the edge of our lantern light. I gave him gentle pats, trying to calm him, but his hackles remained raised. Meanwhile, Mason sat on a rock, silent and tense. Occasionally, he'd mutter to himself or let out a soft chuckle at nothing. I tried to ignore it, focusing on keeping warm and dry. With the relentless rain, starting a fire was nearly impossible. After a dozen attempts, I managed to coax a tiny flame to life, sheltering it with my body. I boiled some water from the stream we passed earlier, hoping to at least have something hot to drink. Night descended in earnest. The storm raged overhead, thunder rumbling, lightning throwing harsh flashes across the forest. It was in one of those flashes that I saw something that nearly stopped my heart. Out among the trees, maybe 50 yards away, stood a silhouette, tall, gaunt, with limbs too long for a normal human. The figure's head snapped toward me in the lightning flash. Then darkness again. When the next flash came, it was gone. I scrambled closer to Mason, my voice trembling. "There's someone out there." He sighed, as if he expected this. "He who mimics," he said. "A shapeshifter, maybe a skinwalker. Some old stories say it wears people's faces, sometimes their skins. You believe in that kind of thing?" "No," I said instinctively, but a flood of dread told me I might have no choice but to believe. "Does that have to do with the footprints? The rotting food?" Mason shrugged. "Could be. All I know is that I've seen it follow people, lure them deeper in. Once you see it, it doesn't let go." A silent hush fell between us. Rain pattered against the leaves and thunder boomed overhead. Duke whimpered, pressing his nose against my thigh. I coaxed him into the tent with me. Mason said he'd sleep out by the small fire, but I suspected he wasn't going to sleep at all. Something about him told me he was always on edge, maybe even enjoyed it. The night was a torture of half sleep and jolting awake. Once, I thought I heard my own voice outside the tent, calling Duke. Another time, I felt something press against the tent wall, inches from my face. I held my breath until it was gone. When morning finally arrived, the rain had stopped. Mist clung to every surface, swirling around the tree trunks. My watch read 4:48 a.m., but the sky was brightening. More like 7 a.m. The moment I unzipped my tent, Duke sprang out, barking furiously. I emerged to see Mason calmly packing his gear, wearing a crooked smile. "Mornin'," he said. "We should move. I want to find a better spot." Part of me wanted to break away from him, but the rational side argued I might not survive alone in this twisted forest, especially with everything going haywire. So I trudged along behind him, Duke in the lead. After a couple of hours, or so I guessed, since my watch was useless, Mason announced he was going to look for firewood. The sky had cleared somewhat, and the forest dripped with the aftermath of the storm. "You wait here," he said. "I'll be back." Before I could argue, he vanished between the trees. That left me and Duke alone. I looked around, noticing the forest had changed from pine to a mixture of oak and hickory, the floor littered with wet leaves. I considered using the moment to slip away from Mason, but I had no idea which direction was safe. Instead, I took inventory of my supplies, what little remained. 2 energy bars, half a bag of trail mix, and some water. Everything else was ruined. I'd lost track of my map sometime in the storm or the frantic nighttime scramble. My phone was dead, worthless. Minutes passed, then an hour. I started to worry. Duke seemed anxious, pacing the perimeter. Just as I was about to call out for Mason, he returned, carrying an armful of sticks. But something was off. His expression was vacant, yet he wore a too-wide smile. Usually his gaze was sharp, scanning the woods for danger. Now, he just stared straight ahead. "You get enough wood?" I asked, forcing a casual tone. He said nothing, dropping the sticks near my feet. Then he turned to me with that unwavering grin. "I got plenty," he said. His voice sounded wrong, like he was forcing each word. "Mason, you okay?" His eyes flickered in the morning light, and for a moment I saw something black swirl in his pupils. "Don't call me that," he said softly. "Don't call you what, Mason?" He tensed, as though hearing nails on a chalkboard. "That's not my name." He stared at me expectantly, waiting for me to speak again. I swallowed. "You told me your name was Mason Pierce, remember?" The corners of his mouth twitched. "I remember. But that's not right. My name is Pierce, just Pierce." A cold wave of fear rolled through me. He'd introduced himself first as Mason, then as Mason Pierce. Now, just Pierce. "All right, Pierce," I said slowly. "Maybe we should figure out how to get out of here." He laughed, an uncomfortably long, hollow laugh, and turned away, rummaging in his pack. Duke let out a low warning growl, but Pierce didn't seem to notice. I decided to keep quiet and pack my tent. Then, out of nowhere, he spoke again. "It's hungry," he said. "Who's hungry?" He gestured vaguely at the forest. "It, the one you saw." He turned to face me, eyes distant. "It feeds on fear, and flesh if you let it close enough. It can wear us if it wants." I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. I thought about the silhouette in the storm, the footprints, the rotting food. "How do we stop it?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted the answer. His eyes lit with a spark of something like anger or madness. "I don't know. Hurt it, maybe, burn it. I've seen it take bullets and keep walking." His grin returned, unsettling and wide. "That's how it gets you." Slowly. For an uneasy stretch, we hiked in silence. We found a narrower trail, more of a deer path than a real footpath, winding deeper into the forest. I'd occasionally see a flicker of movement in the corner of my eye, a figure or a shape, but always gone when I looked directly. The day wore on, though the light never seemed to reach a true midday brightness. It felt like living in a perpetual early evening. When it started growing darker, I was exhausted, both physically and mentally. My muscles ached, my head pounded from dehydration, and Duke's normally cheerful demeanor was replaced by constant vigilance. Still, we pressed on until we stumbled across something that made my blood run cold. A small clearing with a single tall tree in the center, and something hanging from one of its branches. At first, I thought it might be an animal carcass, but as I drew closer, I recognized clothing, limbs. My limbs. The figure wearing my face hung there like a grotesque puppet, eyes open, mouth slack. I froze, every nerve in my body screaming for me to run. The face was undeniably mine, down to the faint scar on my cheek from a biking accident in college. Yet there I stood, very much alive, staring up at my own lifeless features. Duke barked frantically, leaping around the base of the tree. Pierce let out a coarse laugh. "Caught you, did it?" He approached the tree, crouching to get a better look. "It's just messing with your head." Retching, I turned away, tears burning in my eyes. This was impossible. I wanted to believe it was some sick trick or a hallucination, but the details were too precise. Even the clothing matched mine. Slowly, I forced myself to step closer. My stomach churned at the stench of decay. The body's flesh was pallid, the joints stiff. As I stared, the head twitched slightly, the eyes rolling to lock onto mine. A soft moan escaped its lips. I staggered back, my vision going dark at the edges. No, no. I couldn't reconcile what I saw. I was here, alive. Yet that was also me. Pierce planted a hand on my shoulder. "We need to move," he said. "Staying here is bad luck." But I couldn't pry my gaze away. The hung figure made another feeble motion, its mouth opening. A sound, half rattle, half whisper, floated through the cold air. "You're not supposed to be here." That voice was mine, but drenched in agony. I dropped to my knees, horror sinking into my bones. Duke whined and tried to nuzzle me back to my feet. Pierce, growing impatient, grabbed me by the arm. "On your feet," he hissed. "It's messing with you. Don't let it." Shaking, I stood up. My mind threatened to fracture, but I clung to the will to survive. Pierce dragged me onward, around the gruesome tree. The moment we left that clearing, I felt time blur, each step a haze of fear and disbelief. I barely registered the forest around me, consumed by the image of my own corpse. We reached a small gully, littered with wet leaves and rotting logs. Pierce stopped abruptly. I nearly collided with his back. He turned to me, and in the dim, grayish light, I saw that something was terribly wrong with his face. The skin was darker and cracked where I'd seen the burn scar. His eyes were wholly black, pupils and irises indistinguishable. He grinned, wide enough that I thought his cheeks might tear. "It's time," he said. "For what?" I whispered, heart pounding. Without warning, he lunged at me, swinging his knife. Duke barked wildly and leapt between us, clamping his jaws on Pierce's forearm. Pierce didn't scream. He just laughed, even as blood, thick, almost black, welled from the wound. With terrifying strength, he flung Duke aside, sending him sprawling. Duke yelped, but scrambled back onto his feet, ready to protect me again. In a panic, I grabbed a fallen branch. Pierce came at me once more, knife thrusting toward my chest. Duke snapped at his leg, slowing him. I brought the branch down on the side of Pierce's head, connecting with a dull thud. He staggered, but didn't go down. Instead, he slammed me into a tree, the impact knocking the wind out of me. "I shouldn't have let you follow me," he hissed through gritted teeth. "You're making it stronger." Summoning every ounce of courage, I kicked out, connecting with his shin. He stumbled backward and Duke clamped onto his arm again. Pierce roared, but not like a normal man, more like an animal in fury. I saw the black swirl in his eyes intensify, the blood trickling from his mouth. He swung his knife down at Duke, slicing deep into my dog's throat before I could stop him. "No!" My scream tore through the forest as Duke collapsed, letting out a final gurgling whimper. I felt my heart shatter, rage flooding every nerve in my body. I grabbed the same branch and swung again at Pierce, catching him hard in the jaw. His head snapped back and he hit the ground. For a moment, he stayed motionless. Trembling, I dropped to my knees by Duke's side, tears streaming down my face, my throat tight with grief. My hand hovered over the fatal wound and I could do nothing to save him. He was gone, my loyal companion lost to this nightmare. Pierce stirred, letting out a hollow laugh. "You never belonged here," he spat, rising to his elbows. He told me you needed to die." He staggered up, looming over me. I realized in that moment that whatever inhabited him wasn't human. The man named Mason was either dead or lost, just a vessel for the thing in these woods. I dropped Duke's limp body gently and grasped for something, anything to defend myself. My fingers brushed the still-burning tip of a broken branch I'd tried to light earlier. The tip was glowing orange, a tiny flicker of flame beneath the bark. As Pierce lunged at me again, I thrust the burning end straight into his face. The flesh sizzled, an acrid smell filling the air. But he didn't scream, he laughed, a raw, guttural noise. Fueled by desperation, I pushed harder, forcing him to the ground. Flames sparked and spread across his hair and clothing as if they'd been doused in accelerant. The shrill hiss of burning flesh and the sizzling pop of wet fabric turning to smoke assaulted my senses. I braced myself to witness some horrific refusal to die, but his body spasmed, the laughter twisting into gurgles as the flames consumed him. Panting, I stumbled away, tears blurring my vision. Duke's body lay crumpled, still warm. I wanted to collapse in despair, but I remembered Pierce, warned me that the creature could regenerate, shapeshift. I had to keep moving or risk facing something even worse. Clutching my side, where I was bruised from the fight, I staggered through the trees. Blood pounded in my ears, my throat raw from screaming and sobbing. I no longer cared about my gear or the trail. I just wanted out of these cursed woods. Time warped as I stumbled along. The sun seemed to race across the sky, occasionally plunging me into darkness, even though it couldn't have been more than an hour since midday. Then it would jump back, bright light searing my eyes. My limbs felt leaden, my lungs burned, but I refused to stop. Once, I thought I heard Duke's bark echo behind me. I spun around, tears in my eyes, but of course he wasn't there. I pressed on, half mad with grief and terror. After what could have been minutes or hours, I emerged onto a dirt road. Relief flooded me at the sight of tire tracks and signs of civilization. But as I limped along the road, I realized I didn't recognize the direction or the landscape. Everything still seemed oddly distorted. Distant trees leaning at impossible angles. The only anchor I had was the road's dusty surface beneath my boots. Then I heard a car engine. At first it was faint, but it grew louder. I waved my arms frantically, stumbling into the center of the road. A battered old truck emerged around a bend, headlights blazing even though it seemed like midday. My heart soared. I was saved, or so I thought. The truck slowed to a stop and the driver rolled down the window. I froze, my mind reeling. The driver looked exactly like me down to the shape of the nose and the small scar on my cheek. He wore a blank expression, then gave a too-wide smile. "I've been looking for you," he said, voice calm. "Need a ride?" I stood there, rooted to the spot, breath caught in my throat. It was my face, my eyes, but with something dark and alien behind them. Every muscle in my body told me to run, but my legs refused to move. "Come on," he repeated gently, "hop in." The passenger door swung open, even though I hadn't touched the handle. My mind flashed to the corpse in the tree, the rotting supplies, the illusions in the forest. This was no rescue. I stumbled back a step, shaking my head. "No," I managed to croak. His smile didn't falter. "Suit yourself," he said. Then, in a voice that perfectly mirrored mine, he added, "You're not supposed to be here." He slammed the gas, and the truck roared forward, speeding off down the road. I watched my own face vanish into the distance, leaving me in a dusty haze. I sank to my knees, body trembling, tears cutting tracks through the dirt on my face. The dread of it all, my dog's death, the confusion, the shifting forest, pinned me to the ground like a crushing weight. I don't know how long I stayed there, but eventually I forced myself upright. My entire body ached, and I felt sure some bones might be cracked or ribs bruised from the fight with Pierce. Yet the fear of staying alone on this road fueled me to keep going. Step by step, with no sense of time, I walked. Occasionally, I heard vehicles passing in the distance, but they never appeared. The road itself seemed to stretch on infinitely. Then, without warning, I came around a bend and saw a sign for a county highway. Relief and disbelief mingled in my chest. I followed the sign to a crossroad that I recognized from my drives into Chaha, a battered old intersection with a small wooden marker. I stumbled out onto the main road just as a sedan approached. This time, the driver was a middle-aged woman. She slowed, leaning out her window, eyebrows furrowed with concern. "You all right, hun?" she asked, her southern accent gentle. I need help," I stammered, tears welling up again. "Lost. My phone died. My dog—" I choked on the words, not sure how to explain the rest. "Please." She nodded, pushing the passenger door open. "Get in. I'll take you to the ranger station." I hesitated for a split second, haunted by the memory of my own face behind the wheel. But the warmth in her voice, her sympathetic eyes, convinced me. I slid into the seat and closed the door. The vinyl felt cold against my back, and the smell of old cigarette smoke and cheap air freshener enveloped me. She offered me a bottle of water, and I gulped it down, ignoring the taste of plastic and chemicals. She peppered me with questions. Where had I been? Did I get hurt? Where was my gear? I answered as best I could, though I left out the supernatural details. She seemed concerned enough by my physical injuries and shock. I told her I'd lost my dog, that something had happened. She comforted me gently, promising to help me contact the park rangers to recover anything that might remain. By the time we reached the small ranger station, my body was shutting down with exhaustion. A ranger with a gruff mustache took my information, said he'd arrange a search for Duke if possible. I didn't have the courage to tell him I knew exactly where my dog lay, nor could I convey that even finding the spot might be impossible given how the forest warped. Instead, I mumbled about being attacked by a crazed individual named Mason Pierce, but I couldn't provide details about exactly where it happened. The ranger's expression shifted from worry to suspicion, though he didn't outright accuse me of lying. He probably figured I was traumatized or delirious. Paramedics arrived soon after, checking my vitals, bandaging scrapes, and offering me a ride to the hospital. I felt numb, physically and emotionally. I watched the rangers gear up for a search, their expressions stony but determined. They had no idea what they were walking into, if they even made it to the same nightmare I'd stumbled through. For all I knew, that entire patch of forest might shift and vanish, leaving them with nothing to find. In the ambulance, as we rumbled away, I stared out the small side window at the trees blurring past. For a moment, I thought I saw a shape between the trunks, a tall, lanky figure with a twisted grin. I blinked and it was gone. My reflection stared back, gaunt, eyes rimmed with red. I tried to see if my lips would curl into that too-wide grin, but I couldn't. It was still just me, trembling and broken. When I arrived at the hospital, they said I was dehydrated, suffering mild shock, and had bruised ribs. I answered more questions from concerned doctors and a policeman. I kept my story simple. I got lost, was attacked by a stranger, and my dog was killed in the struggle. For the rest, I feigned memory gaps, which they accepted without much pushback. They were used to frightened, confused hikers with partial recollections of a trauma. Only I knew the deeper truths, and I suspected no one would ever believe them. Over the next few weeks, I tried to return to normalcy. I went back to my apartment in Birmingham, tried to bury myself in work, and spent my nights haunted by nightmares. Sometimes I woke to the sound of Duke barking in the darkness, only to remember with heartbreak that he was gone. Other times I woke sure I heard my own voice whisper in the hallway, "You're not supposed to be here." I never saw that shape-shifting entity again. The rangers never found any trace of Pierce, nor of the clearing where I'd seen my own body hanging. They chalked it up to a delusion caused by dehydration and shock, or so they told me. But I've noticed that my reflection sometimes lingers a split second too long after I move away from a mirror, or that I catch glimpses of something in my peripheral vision that resembles me, grinning, waiting. I don't know if this story ends with dread or with the faintest closure. I survived, though I'm not sure how much of me the forest stole that day. And I'm certain that whatever I encountered is still out there, drifting through Chaha's ancient pines. Maybe it's waiting for the next unsuspecting hiker who thinks a week in the wilderness will help them find themselves. So, if you're reading this, if you decide to venture into remote parts of Chaha State Park, bring more than just your gear. Bring a certain respect for whatever lurks there. Something that can wear faces, twist time, and feed on fear. And if you hear your own voice calling you from the shadows, or see footprints matching your boots heading the wrong way, turn back. If you find your beloved dog acting strange, or meet a stranger who changes his name, run. Because once it notices you, it won't let you go. And if you see me out there, be sure it's really me, because I'm Ethan Caldwell. I'm 29, and I barely escaped those woods alive. My name is Caleb Fisher. I was 28 years old when all of this happened, and it was May 2023. I remember the exact date I drove out to the Konaku National Forest, because it was the day after I finally signed the last of the paperwork for my old apartment lease, a place I'd once shared with my ex-girlfriend. I don't think I realized how desperate I was to escape the reminders of my old life, until I caught myself gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles went white. The plan was to spend a week camping alone with my dog, Duke, to prove to myself that I could survive off the grid. Just me, my gear, and nature. I was no wilderness expert. I worked construction and mobile, and had only gone on a handful of short camping trips. But I needed something big, something bold, to shake me out of the funk I'd been drowning in. Duke, my German shepherd, sat in the passenger seat and occasionally stuck his snout out of the open window, sniffing the air. He was excited. I could tell by the way his ears were perked. He'd always been a calm, protective dog, but on that drive, he was as giddy as a puppy. I let the smell of pine roll into the truck and started feeling some of that excitement too. A new start, I kept telling myself. A chance to clear my head, test my limits, come back stronger. I had a paper map because I'd read about poor cell service out in the deeper sections of the forest, but I still had my phone and a brand new handheld GPS. Part of me was cocky. I'd done short overnights, so how hard could a 5-day trip really be? I arrived at a small parking area near a ranger station, but it was empty. A single, faded sign pointed to a well-trodden trail that snaked into denser woods. My plan was to trek beyond the typical sites, find a secluded clearing, and camp there. I had enough food, water, and a filter system for the streams and creeks. I locked the truck, loaded up my pack, clipped on Duke's leash, and started hiking. The first few hours were uneventful. Just me getting sweaty under the afternoon sun, listening to the forest hum with insects and birdsong. Every now and then, Duke stopped to sniff at some patch of ground or tree trunk, but otherwise we made good progress. We set up camp by late afternoon. It was a small clearing with just enough room for my tent and a spot to tie off Duke's lead if I needed to. I was far from any official campsite. I'd hiked off the main trail and navigated by the GPS. My phone still had some battery left, so I snapped a couple photos. The place was gorgeous. Towering pine trees filtered the gold light of the lowering sun, and the forest floor was thick with ferns. The air smelled raw and clean. I felt a flicker of pride that I'd managed to find such an isolated spot. This was going to be the perfect hideaway. I made a quick dinner of freeze-dried pasta, gave Duke his kibble, and set up my sleeping bag inside the tent. That first night, I was too wound up to drift off quickly. I stared at the tent's nylon ceiling and listened to the sounds of the night. Crickets chirped, and the occasional rustle of branches told me squirrels or some other small creatures were moving around. Duke was curled at my feet. I must have dozed off eventually because the next thing I knew it was late. My watch read just after midnight and I was wide awake. Duke was awake too, stiff, his ears rigid. He let out a low growl. I propped myself up on an elbow. "What is it, buddy?" I whispered, peering into the darkness. The forest was pitch black, but my eyes began to adjust. A strange rustling came from somewhere to my right. It could have been a deer or a raccoon. I tapped Duke gently, calming him, and listened for a moment. The rustling stopped. I told myself it was just an animal. Eventually, Duke settled down. Still, something about that moment made me uneasy. The night felt heavier, and I lay there staring at the tent wall for a long time before sleep found me again. Morning brought sunlight and a renewed sense of confidence. I laughed off my midnight jitters. After all, I'd never camped alone for this many nights. Jumpy nerves came with the territory. I had a quick breakfast, fed Duke, and pulled out my GPS to plan the day's hike deeper into the forest. But the screen was acting up, flickering. Eventually, it turned off. I tried turning it back on, and it lit for a moment, only to die again. "That's weird," I muttered, fiddling with the batteries. They were brand new, fresh out of the pack the previous day. The battery bar had shown full, but now, nothing. Shrugging, I pulled out my phone, only to find it dead as well. No battery. Completely black screen. That made no sense. I'd turned it off when I went to sleep, and it had still been at around 70%. Stunned, I rummaged in my backpack for my spare battery bank. That was missing. I distinctly remembered packing it, but it wasn't in the side pouch where I always kept it. Annoyed, but not yet alarmed, I reminded myself I still had a physical map. "Fine," I said to Duke, who tilted his head. "It's not like I can't read a map." I decided to move camp anyway. My plan had always been to hike every day and make a new campsite each night. I packed up, checked the map for a route that followed a creek, and set off. Around noon, my confidence took a knock when I realized the landmarks weren't matching up. The creek I was supposed to be walking alongside was nowhere to be seen. The map said it would be on my left, but there was just a gently sloping forest floor. I stopped, double-checked the compass. It said I was heading west, which was correct, but the terrain looked nothing like the topographic lines on the paper. I spent another hour trudging around, trying to make sense of it. Eventually, I stumbled onto a creek, but it was smaller than I'd expected. Maybe I was further upstream, or on a completely different body of water. I started to feel anxious, but I forced myself to stay calm. I had plenty of supplies, after all. And besides, I was in decent shape. If worst came to worst, I could just backtrack the way I came and head for the truck in a day. This trip was about proving I could handle adversity. So I set up my second campsite on a stretch of relatively flat ground near the water. Duke seemed restless, pacing around. The water was cold and clear, so I refilled my canteen and water filter. The day slid by uneventfully, with me whittling a walking stick from a sturdy branch and occasionally tossing a ball for Duke to chase. I tried to ignore the creeping disquiet I felt every time I glanced at my dead phone. The night's earlier weirdness was probably just a fluke. Technology fails all the time, right? That night, I built a fire carefully. More carefully than ever, actually, because a lingering sense of unease nagged at me. I needed light, needed to push away the eerie darkness of the forest. The fire was comforting at first, the flames dancing and crackling. But as the evening wore on, the flames started to behave oddly. They'd flutter, gutter out for a second, and then spring back to life. It was the strangest thing I'd ever seen. It was like the logs themselves were fighting to keep burning. Then, at one point, the flames flickered a faint blue. I blinked, certain I must be imagining it, but it happened again just for a second, and then returned to normal. I threw some more kindling on and tried not to freak out. Duke remained close, occasionally letting out a low whine. I was just getting ready to bed down when a voice called out from the trees. "Hello? Anyone there?" It was a man's voice, carrying softly through the darkness. My heart gave a huge leap because the last thing I expected was to find someone else wandering this far-off trail. I stood, grabbing my flashlight, but it refused to turn on. Great. I tossed it aside and called back, "Yeah, I'm here by the fire." A figure emerged from the gloom. A man, mid-30s, with a rifle slung over his shoulder. He wore a dusty baseball cap and a flannel jacket. "Hey, sorry if I startled you," he said. "Name's Travis Ellison. I got a little turned around out here. Mind if I warm up by your fire?" Duke bristled and growled softly. I put a reassuring hand on his head. "I'm Caleb," I replied, trying to mask my surprise. "Sure, have a seat. This is Duke." Travis nodded at the dog, carefully set his rifle aside, and sat by the flames, extending his hands. Now that he was closer, I could see the lines of fatigue etched in his face, like he hadn't slept in days. His jacket was torn near the elbow and his boots looked caked with dried mud. "I appreciate it," he said quietly. "You alone out here?" "Yep, just me and Duke," I said. "Trying to do a little multi-day trip, but I'm more off the grid than I intended. GPS died, phone died, maps not matching the terrain." I tried to keep my tone light. Travis nodded sympathetically. "Happens more often than you'd think. These woods can be tricky, especially if you stray from marked trails. I'm out here trying to bag a few hogs, but I ended up losing track of my bearings. Didn't expect to run into anyone." He offered me a rough smile, which I returned. Despite his pleasant enough demeanor, Duke still hadn't relaxed. We chatted for a bit, discussing hunts, local trails, and the nearest roads. Travis claimed to be somewhat familiar with Konaku's deeper sections. "Some folks around here say these parts are haunted," he remarked with a smirk. "Silly stories about voices in the woods, things that mimic you." He gave an awkward little laugh. "Just folks letting their imaginations run wild, right?" "Right," I muttered, though the memory of hearing something rustling outside my tent the night before and the weird color of the fire made me feel less certain. Eventually, Travis helped me stoke the flames. With his assistance, the fire seemed to burn more steadily than before. I offered him some of my freeze-dried meals, and he devoured them like a starved man. We talked a while longer, and I found myself growing more at ease. Maybe this was a stroke of luck. Someone who knew the area better and could point me back toward the ranger station. Before turning in for the night, Travis said he'd help guide me at first light, show me a more reliable route out. I let him sleep by the fire while Duke and I took the tent. I dozed off quickly, relieved to have human company. Sometime in the night I woke to the sound of footsteps. Soft, shuffling. At first, I thought maybe Travis was stepping away to relieve himself, but the steps didn't go far. They circled the tent once, twice, then paused right by my head. Duke lifted his head and growled. I called out, "Travis?" No answer. The footsteps scuffed away, and after a minute or two I heard nothing else. I lay there for a long time, heart pounding, until exhaustion pulled me under again. In the morning, I emerged from the tent to find Travis already awake, staring into the last embers of the fire. He looked tired, his eyes bloodshot. I asked if he'd been walking around the campsite last night, but he just gave me a confused frown. "I slept like a rock," he said. "Didn't move a muscle." He offered to take me to a vantage point nearby from where, he claimed, you could see a forest road in the distance. I agreed. We packed up, and as I was reorganizing my gear, I noticed a cold wave of alarm. My backpack was gone. "What the hell?" I muttered. I searched everywhere around the campsite, behind fallen logs, near the creek, but it was nowhere. It had vanished in the night. Travis claimed he hadn't touched it. I believed him. He had his own gear, and he seemed equally puzzled. Without my pack, I had no extra clothes, limited food, no filter. All I had left was what was in the tent and my pockets. A small pocket knife, some snack bars, my empty phone, and my map. Frustrated and a bit panicked, I tried to contain my anger. Travis suggested we search a bit before heading to the vantage point. After 10 minutes of combing the underbrush, we spotted my pack hanging from a tree branch about 50 yards away. It was dangling at least 10 feet off the ground, like some twisted prank. I had no idea how it got there. Shaken, I yanked it down. Everything looked intact, though some of the contents, like my water filter, felt oddly damp and smelled sour. My spare battery bank was still missing. We left that creepy scene behind and started hiking. Travis led the way, stepping with confidence despite his claim that he'd been lost too. Duke continued to give him a wary look, but mostly stuck to my side. The forest grew denser as we went, the trees leaning inward, creating a tunnel-like effect. I realized after about 30 minutes that we weren't climbing any higher, yet Travis swore up and down that the vantage point was just a bit further. I didn't want to sound ungrateful, but I started doubting him. My suspicions grew when he started babbling about how these woods mess with your sense of time. "You ever notice," he said, "you look at your watch, it says one thing. 5 minutes later, you look again. It's like 2 hours have passed?" I glanced at my watch out of reflex. It was a few minutes past noon. I put it away. Then, the next time I looked, it was nearly 3 in the afternoon. I couldn't figure out how that was possible. I didn't remember it taking so long to walk that short distance. Eventually, we reached a clearing, but there was no vantage point. Just a ring of pines and scattered rocks. I was about to call Travis out, ask him if he was playing some kind of trick, when Duke started barking furiously. I spun around, scanning the tree line, half expecting to see a bear or some other predator. But there was nothing. Then, from behind me, Travis let out a pained gasp. I turned to see him doubled over, clutching his stomach. He sank to his knees, trembling. I rushed over, reached for him. "Are you okay?" I asked, my voice cracking. He gave me a haunted look. His eyes were wide, unfocused. He whispered something I couldn't catch, then suddenly stiffened. "Maybe I just need some rest," he mumbled, staggering to his feet. Without saying another word, he started walking toward a grouping of rocks on the far side of the clearing. He sat there for a while, pale and silent, while Duke and I hovered. I was torn between wanting to help him and wanting to get the hell out of the woods as soon as possible. The idea of following him deeper was losing its appeal fast. After a few minutes, he rose, face tense but seemingly stable again. "Let's get back to a better trail," he said, his tone more subdued. "We'll figure out our next move." Despite my misgivings, I followed. At that point, I felt it was safer to keep him close. At least I wouldn't be alone. The route back was even more confusing. Twice, we passed by a fallen log I was certain we'd passed before, but from different angles, as if we were going in circles. The sun was sliding lower in the sky, turning the woods a dim, claustrophobic maze. I felt the old panic swelling. My map was practically useless, bearing no resemblance to the reality around me. By the time we stumbled onto a small, relatively level spot to set up camp again, it was almost dark. Exhausted, we assembled a small fire pit. I tried lighting a fire with a few dry branches, but the flames kept sputtering. Travis took over, and, oddly enough, the moment he knelt to spark the tinder, it caught and roared to life. "Guess I've got the magic touch," he joked half-heartedly, though his voice sounded strange in the twilight. I just watched the flames dance, trying to ignore the creeping paranoia that the forest itself was messing with me. Duke sat at my side, occasionally growling at Travis. I didn't know what to make of that. It must have been around 8 or 9 in the evening, though I'd stopped trusting my watch by then. We shared a quick meal of jerky and energy bars. Then I retreated to the tent, telling Travis he could use his own sleeping bag outside by the fire if he preferred. He said he didn't mind roughing it. I think both of us wanted space from each other. Before long, I was lulled into a shallow sleep by the flickering firelight. I awoke to the snap of a twig outside the tent. Duke lifted his head, ears at attention. My own pulse quickened. Then came another snap, closer this time. I heard something drag lightly across the tent fabric. I wanted to call out to Travis, but I couldn't form the words. I was gripped with a primal fear I'd never felt before. Whatever was out there, it was circling me, pressing against the nylon. I could hear a low whisper, like someone saying my name in the softest, most intimate tone. My heart hammered. I recognized that voice. It was mine. Someone was whispering my name in my own voice. Then it was gone, leaving behind a breathless silence. Morning came and I burst out of the tent, half expecting to see footprints or some sign that a person had stood there. But the ground was a web of pine needles and twisted roots. There was no telling what might have passed. Travis was gone. His sleeping bag lay empty beside the ashes of the dead fire. Panicked, I shouted his name. No response. I searched around the camp until I found a note scratched into the dirt with a stick, "Gathering wood. Back soon." It was scrawled hastily, as if by someone in a hurry. I paced for what felt like an hour, a sense of dread building. Duke whined at my side. Travis didn't return. The sunlight shifted overhead, the day creeping by, until I realized it must have been midday, or later. Still no sign of him. I was furious and scared at the same time. Had he just abandoned me? Had he gotten lost or injured? The possibilities were endless. I weighed my options. I could try to find him, or I could strike out on my own, but which way was out? Eventually, in mid-afternoon, according to my watch, which felt increasingly unreliable, I caught sight of a figure approaching through the trees. Travis, carrying an armload of wood. Relief, anger, and confusion tangled in my head. "Where the hell were you?" I demanded. He dumped the wood unceremoniously on the ground. "Got turned around," he said. But something about his voice was off, like he was forcing the words out carefully. He stood there, shoulders rigid. His eyes locked onto me, unblinking. Then he smiled, just a little too wide. A shiver skittered down my spine. "Turned around for hours?" I asked, unsettled by his demeanor. Why didn't you call out or something? He shrugged. Don't make a fuss. I'm back. Let's just get this fire started. His smile lingered. It wasn't friendly. It was almost predatory. I'd never seen anyone smile like that before, like the act of smiling was foreign to them, and they were imitating what they thought a human would do. Travis, I said slowly, trying to keep my voice steady, are you feeling all right? He blinked, once, slowly, then turned away. Better than ever, he replied. His voice had a sing-song quality to it that made my stomach churn. Duke let out a series of short, sharp barks. Normally, he was calm around people, but now he snarled, showing teeth at Travis. Travis merely glanced at the dog and gave another unsettling grin. I tried to busy myself with reorganizing camp, torn between wanting to keep an eye on Travis and wanting to get as far from him as possible. He started piling the wood for a fire, humming softly in a broken melody that made no sense. At one point, I asked him about the vantage point he'd promised. He pretended not to hear me. Later, while sifting through my pack, I realized all my bread and jerky had started to mold. The food I'd had just yesterday had rotted overnight, turning green and fuzzy. I gagged, tossing it aside. Travis watched me. Spoiled supplies, he remarked in a flat tone. Should have packed better, Caleb. A giggle bubbled out of him, devoid of humor. My heart pounded. That was the first time he'd said my name in a while. Night fell with an oppressive quickness, as if someone had flicked a cosmic switch to extinguish the sun. Travis insisted on tending the fire. Whenever I tried to stoke it, the flames sputtered, but whenever he touched it, the fire roared. Something was profoundly wrong with him. I thought maybe he's sick, delirious from some infection or poisoning, or maybe he's not Travis at all. Some part of me whispered, a part I tried to silence. We sat on opposite sides of the fire. Duke stayed close to me, occasionally letting out a low growl. Travis just stared into the flames, his face highlighted in flickering orange. After a while, he started talking, unprompted. Time's all twisted out here, he said softly. Can't trust your watch, can't trust your eyes. Hour could be a day could be an hour, understand? He lifted his gaze to me. His eyes gleamed with an unnerving intensity. I swallowed. What do you mean? Can't you feel it? Travis continued, ignoring my question. It's why your map doesn't make sense, why you walk and walk but never get anywhere. His grin widened. Why your dog is afraid. I tried to hide the tremor in my voice. Travis, we need to find a real path tomorrow. We can't stay out here. Something isn't right. Understatement of the year. He only nodded, but said nothing. Eventually, exhaustion and fear wrestled in my brain, and exhaustion won. I climbed into my tent, half expecting Travis to attack me in my sleep, but too drained to remain on guard. I dozed off fitfully, every snapping twig making me jerk awake. At some point, I drifted into a deeper sleep, only to be torn from it by Duke's frantic barking. It was pitch black. The fire seemed to have gone out. I fumbled for my flashlight. Nothing. Broken. Travis? I called, my voice cracking in terror. Silence. Duke kept barking. I unzipped the tent, stepping out into the near-total darkness. The moon was hidden by clouds. The coals of the fire offered a faint glow. Duke snarled at a shape standing by the largest pine near the clearing's edge. Travis? I called again. The figure didn't respond. I inched closer, my pulse hammering in my ears. A twig snapped underfoot and the figure jerked its head around. Yes, it was Travis. But his face... The flicker from the coals cast just enough light to reveal a horrifying sight. Travis's lips were parted, and there was something wrong with his mouth. It was slack, elongated, as if his jaw had unhinged slightly. It took me a second to realize he was whispering under his breath, though I couldn't make out the words. Then he let out a soft laugh, two voices at once, his normal voice and a deeper, rasping hiss. I staggered backward, nearly tripping. Duke barked, lunging forward. Travis, if it was still Travis, reached out and grabbed Duke by the scruff of the neck with impossible strength. I let out a strangled shout. My dog yelped, snapped his jaws, struggling. The creature turned its awful gaze to me, and in my own voice it whispered, "Help me." With adrenaline surging, I hurled myself forward, crashing into Travis's side. We went to the ground. Duke scrambled free, whimpering. Up close, Travis smelled like earth and rot. He lashed out at me, swinging an arm that felt unnaturally strong. His nails dug into my shoulder, drawing hot blood. I yelled in pain, driving my knee into his ribs. He laughed in that horrifying, double-voiced way. My mind reeled. He was so much stronger than any normal human. Duke pounced, sinking his teeth into Travis's forearm. I expected Travis to scream, but he only grinned, turning those wild eyes toward my dog. Panicking, I reached for my pocket knife. I jammed it into Travis's chest. The blade slid in, releasing a thick, dark fluid that was too black to be blood. Travis didn't react with pain. He just looked at the wound, then at me. Then he lunged closer, hissing, "You should have left sooner." His breath stank of decay. He pinned me, forcing the air from my lungs. Duke darted in, snapping at his throat, but Travis somehow twisted, grabbing Duke's muzzle and shoving the dog away. Desperation fueled me. I yanked the knife out and stabbed again, aiming higher. The blade sunk in with a wet sound, and Travis shuddered. A cruel laugh bubbled from his mouth, black goo dribbling down his chin. His face stretched. A grin so wide it looked like it would tear his cheeks. Duke leapt onto his back, teeth bared, trying to rip him away. Travis's expression didn't change. He just giggled, voice garbled by the thick liquid pouring from his lips. I don't remember how I got free, but somehow I wriggled out from under him. I grabbed a large branch from the ground and swung it, cracking it against Travis's shoulder. He staggered. Duke lunged again, and this time, Travis toppled over, still laughing that insane, guttural laugh. The second he hit the ground, I saw something horrifying. His skin seemed loose, sliding slightly, like a poorly fitting suit. Sickened, I stumbled away. "Come on, Duke," I shouted, turning to flee. I heard the dog snarl, then felt him at my side, panting heavily. Behind us, Travis slowly rose. I could see his silhouette against the faint glow of the coals, limbs at bizarre angles. My adrenaline was screaming at me to run, run, run. So I did. Duke and I crashed into the trees, not caring about direction, just wanting as much distance as possible. The forest was black. Branches slapped my face, brambles tore at my legs. Several times I stumbled and nearly fell. Duke barked, guiding me around obstacles as best he could. I had no sense of time or bearing. All I knew was that I had to get away from whatever that was. At some point, we slowed. My lungs burned, sweat soaked my shirt, and my shoulder throbbed from where Travis's nails had torn it open. Blood made the fabric stick to my skin. My knife was still clenched in my trembling hand, though I had no memory of holding on to it. I was too terrified to stop, too exhausted to continue. Eventually, we found a small clearing. Collapsing against a fallen log, I tried to catch my breath. Duke hovered, whining softly, licking my face. I glanced at my watch. It read 2:15 a.m., but I had no idea if that was correct anymore. My mind was spinning. Had Travis been possessed by some entity? Had I been hallucinating? His unnatural strength and those two voices had all defied logic. My body ached. I decided we'd wait until dawn, then figure out how to get out of these damned woods. but dawn never came. I must have dozed off, though it felt like I stayed awake for hours. The blackness of the night seemed to stretch on endlessly. I kept waiting for the first hint of gray in the sky, but it remained dark. Duke curled up next to me, shivering. My watch showed 4:27, then 5:52, then 7:10. Still, no sunrise. My heart hammered every time I realized it should be bright out by now. Something was wrong with time. Eventually, a faint glow appeared to the east, but it felt like it was well past what should have been 8 or 9 in the morning. The forest finally began to reveal itself, the shapes of trees emerging from the gloom. I wasted no time. Despite the fatigue burning in my muscles, I decided to keep moving. Staying put felt too vulnerable. All I knew was I had to get away from Travis, or the thing that wore him. We followed what looked like an old logging road. My plan was to keep going until I found a real road or a creek I could follow to civilization. The morning sun, once it finally arrived, was pale and weak. I checked my map, but it was laughably useless now. Distances, directions, everything seemed random. We trudged on for hours, or what felt like hours. My shoulder burned. I worried about infection. I had nothing to treat it with except some alcohol wipes and a small first aid kit. I did that, wincing, and pressed a gauze pad to the wound. Duke walked silently at my side, occasionally looking over his shoulder. Every now and then I swore I heard a laugh echo through the trees. Midday brought us to a shallow creek. I recognized it, or thought I did. The water was the same spot where I'd first camped. Possibly, but the area around it looked older, more overgrown, like it had been abandoned for years. My mind reeled. I stumbled upon a collapsed tent that looked eerily similar to the one I'd used. The nylon was tattered and rotting. The poles snapped. A chill crawled up my spine. I knelt, examining it. It really was the same brand, same model as mine, but I'd left my tent behind in that clearing when I fled. This one looked like it had been here for ages. My heart hammered as I spotted a half-buried metal water bottle with the same dent on the side as my own. I backed away, shaking my head, refusing to accept what I was seeing. "No," I hissed. "This is not possible," Duke whined, pressing close. Without warning, a voice drifted through the silent woods. "Caleb," it called, softly. "Over here." It was Travis's voice. Or maybe it was mine, or both. I felt a tingling numbness spread through my limbs. I forced myself to run again, half sliding down the creek bank. Duke followed, splashing through the shallow water. We pressed on, hearts pounding, refusing to look back. Eventually, we found a slight incline. In the distance, I saw what looked like a tall structure, maybe a hunting tower perched on a rickety wooden frame. With the desperation fueling me, I headed for it. Climbing the slope, I clutched at tree trunks for balance, ignoring the pain that shot through my shoulder. Duke stayed close, panting. The tower was old, half-rotted planks forming a ladder up to a small platform. But if I could get high enough, maybe I could see a road or a landmark, or at least put some distance between me and whatever was chasing me. I climbed first, Duke whining at the bottom. The platform was cramped, with a single battered chair and a small rusted ammo box. The vantage was decent, but all I saw was an ocean of trees, no roads or cabins in sight. Despair pounded in my chest. Then, below, I heard Duke barking. I looked down to see him circling, tail tucked, ears flattened. That's when I spotted the figure moving among the trees. Travis, or the thing that looked like him. He was limping, but each step was unnaturally lithe, arms and legs bending in slightly wrong angles. His head was tilted, and he was scanning the woods like a predator. My breath caught in my throat. I motioned frantically for Duke to climb up somehow, but it was impossible. There was no dog ramp, no easy way for a large German shepherd to scale that ladder. My heart twisted. If that thing attacked Duke down there, I'd be powerless to help. I hissed, "Come here, boy, come on, come on." Duke growled at the figure. To my horror, Travis's face snapped upward and he locked eyes on me. A grin split his features. I saw no sign of the bullet wound or knife slashes, like the flesh had stitched itself back together. He advanced slowly, that double-voiced laugh echoing in the pines. Duke met him head-on, snarling. Travis lunged impossibly fast. I nearly tore my own hair out in terror watching them clash. Duke clamped onto Travis's arm, shaking, but Travis twisted free, delivering a brutal blow that sent my dog tumbling. I shouted, powerless from the tower. Travis advanced, stepping over the tangle of limbs that was Duke. I grabbed the battered chair and hurled it over the side, hoping to distract him. It crashed to the ground but didn't come close to hitting him. He looked up at me with that dead grin and hissed, "Let's trade places, Caleb." I felt bile rise in my throat. This thing was toying with me. As Travis reached down, presumably to grab Duke again, my dog suddenly kicked back into motion, snapping his jaws around Travis's ankle. Travis let out a guttural snarl, half human, half beast. The two struggled again, but I could see Duke was weakening. Without thinking, I pulled out my pocket knife, my only weapon, and slid down the ladder as fast as I could. I hit the ground, ignoring the jolt of pain through my shoulder, and charged forward. The moment I was close, Travis swung an arm at me. I ducked, half stumbling, and drove the knife into his knee. He let out that eerie laugh, then violently backhanded me. I saw stars, pain exploding in my cheek. Duke limped over, teeth bared, but Travis was too strong. He shoved Duke aside, the dog landing with a sharp yelp. Something in me snapped. I lunged again, slashing wildly. This time, I managed to cut deep into Travis's leg, hearing a sickening tear. Black ooze spilled out, but he didn't drop. Instead, he clutched at me with both hands, pulling me close, his breath washing over my face like a rancid wind. "Caleb," he whispered in my voice. "I know you. I can be you." I gagged as his jaw opened wider than humanly possible. My mind screamed with terror. Summoning every ounce of strength, I twisted free, ripping a chunk of his loose skin in the process. The creature howled, staggering. I saw the leg wound I'd inflicted was gaping. For a moment, the black fluid poured out in a steady stream. He tried to stand on it, but the leg buckled, sending him crashing to the forest floor. An opportunity. I seized it. Clutching Duke's collar, I screamed, "Go!" We sprinted away. Behind us, Travis, or the thing in Travis's skin, laughed, a fading echo of madness. I heard it moan, "Caleb," one last time before distance muffled it. Tears blurred my vision, and Duke limped badly, but we kept going. Adrenaline fueling our flight. Branches clawed at me, stinging and scratching as if the forest itself wanted to stop me. We ran until the forest opened up, and suddenly, I was standing in a sunlit clearing I recognized. The place looked normal again, the trees spaced at a rational distance, the sky bright overhead. My watch read 9:07 a.m. I had no idea if that was accurate. In a daze, I stumbled forward. There, half concealed by brush, was my truck, exactly where I'd left it near the ranger station. The parking area was just beyond a stand of pines. It was as if I'd stepped through a door from a nightmare into reality. I turned to see Duke panting, clearly exhausted, but alive. No sign of the creature. No sign of Travis. A wild laugh rose in my throat, equal parts relief and hysteria. I fumbled my keys from my pocket and opened the truck, half expecting it to vanish or disintegrate at my touch, but it was solid. Duke jumped in, and I climbed behind the wheel, cranking the engine. It roared to life. No magical glitch. I tore out of there, dust kicking up behind me. The next thing I remember clearly is pulling into my driveway. The trip home was a blur. My phone and GPS were still dead, but the roads felt real, and I recognized the route. Once home, I rushed Duke inside, made sure he wasn't badly hurt besides scrapes and bruises. My own shoulder was bleeding, so I poured vodka on it, wincing in agony, then wrapped it in a bandage. I nearly broke down sobbing from relief and leftover terror. I must have fallen asleep on the couch with Duke by my side because the next time my eyes opened, it was evening. My phone was sitting on the coffee table, somehow fully charged. That made my skin crawl. It had been stone dead in the woods. But I needed to know if I'd dreamt everything. I turned on the TV. The local news played softly. They were reporting on a missing hiker in Konaku National Forest. Travis Ellison, 35, had been reported missing by his family. My blood turned to ice water. The screen flickered, and for half a second, the face of the news anchor seemed to warp, taking on my features, staring at me with a grin too wide for any human. I gasped, nearly dropping the remote. Duke growled, ears flat. Then the screen returned to normal. The anchor's face was normal again, reading the teleprompter. My reflection in the TV's glass stared back at me, pale, wide-eyed. My heart thundered. I raced to the bathroom. My breath caught when I saw myself in the mirror. Something about my reflection was off. At first, I thought maybe it was just the shock of my wounds or the bruises on my face, but as I leaned in, my reflection didn't blink. I blinked, once, twice, but the reflection kept staring, eyes unblinking. A soft sound escaped my throat, something between a sob and a whimper. Then, after a long moment, my reflection snapped back into perfect sync with me, blinking rapidly. My legs nearly gave out. I stumbled back, shutting off the bathroom light. My entire body shook with adrenaline and horror. I thought about Travis's voice whispering, "I can be you." Was it still with me somehow? Had I really escaped the forest, or had something followed me out? Duke barked from the living room, a short, sharp sound that told me he sensed my alarm. I took a long breath, ran a trembling hand through my hair, and steadied myself against the wall. I could never fully explain what happened in those woods. Part of me believes something very old and hungry lurks in Konaku National Forest. Something that can bend time, steal faces, and wear people like costumes. I met it, or part of it, while it wore Travis Ellison, and I barely escaped with my life. But every time I pass a mirror, a shop window, or any reflective surface, I watch my reflection carefully, terrified it might stop blinking again, terrified it might grin at me in that impossibly wide way. Days have turned into weeks, weeks into months. Duke's injuries have healed, but he's still jumpy when the sun goes down. I sometimes think I see shadows at the corner of my vision, flickers of movement that vanish the moment I focus on them. I can't shake the feeling that I've brought something back with me, or that I was never truly allowed to leave. I've woken up some nights to find the door wide open, Duke whining, as if something passed through. Maybe it's just my nerves, maybe it's a symptom of trauma, but in the dead of night I remember that voice in the forest. "Let's trade places, Caleb," and I wonder if it already has. I go about my days, working construction, trying to hold it together. But no matter how normal life appears, I carry a dread that festers like a wound. It's a sense that my reflection in the mirror might do something unexpected, that I'll check my phone and see a text I never wrote, that one day I'll see Travis Ellison on the street, wearing my face or someone else's. Perhaps he's out there waiting, or perhaps he's in here, haunting the edges of my psyche. And that is why I can't shake the memory of Konaku National Forest. That's why, at night, I triple lock my doors. Why I keep a loaded shotgun in the corner of my bedroom. and why, if you ever tell me you're planning a solo trip out there, I'll grab you by the shoulders and beg you to stay home. Because some places aren't meant for us. Some places belong to the things that hide behind the trees, things that can twist your mind, your sense of time, and your very reality. And if you aren't careful, if you wander too far or trust the wrong friendly face, you might end up like Travis Ellison. Or worse, you might discover that Travis Ellison has ended up like you. I wish I had more answers, or a neat ending that ties up the horror with a bow. But I only have a splintered reality and a reflection that feels a heartbeat away from betraying me. So I share this story, my story, in the faint hope that it keeps you away from that part of the woods. Because no matter what you believe, I promise you, there is something out there that will wear your skin, your voice, your life. And if it gets inside, it may never leave. That's what happened to me, Caleb Fisher, in May 2023. Or at least that's what I remember. If the reflection in the mirror had its own version, would it tell a different story? God help me, I don't want to find out. My name is Jackson Weaver. I'm 31 years old, a middle school science teacher from Huntsville, Alabama. This happened in November of 2022, back when the days got short too fast and the nights felt like they lasted a lifetime. I wish I could say I've moved past it. Some nights, I almost believe I have. But then I remember the smell of the cold air in Bankhead National Forest, and I can still feel how my heart pounded when I realized that something impossible was hunting us. I'd only been divorced for 6 months at the time, and I thought a weekend camping trip would do me some good. I wanted to clear my head, maybe recharge before the final stretch of the school semester. My friend Derek Hayes, 29, a little younger than me, suggested we head out into the forest for some off-the-grid bonding time. Derek had this knack for brushing off any dangers as just part of the adventure, even though he tended to rely on others to bail him out of trouble. He was overconfident, but he made me laugh when I needed it. We invited 2 others, Lisa Connors and Mark Dunham. Lisa was 26 and had worked as a park ranger in another state for a couple of years. She was the only one among us who truly knew her way around a forest. She was rational, practical, and gave off that natural leader vibe. She was also the only one who seemed visibly uneasy when Derek first proposed Bankhead National Forest. That alone should have warned me something was off, but I didn't listen. Then there was Mark. He was 35, quiet but reliable, a thoughtful guy who enjoyed reading about military history and old battles. Strangely enough, he had a personal connection to Bankhead National Forest. His uncle had disappeared there decades ago. Nobody ever found a body or even a trace. Mark mentioned that to us only once, almost casually, but I could see the sadness in his eyes. It was like he'd never really accepted his uncle's disappearance. Finally, there was my dog, Rufus. He's a black and tan coonhound I'd rescued about a year earlier. Loyal, sharp instincts, always protective of me. He seemed more excited than anyone about the trip, wagging his tail at the first sign of me pulling out the tent and backpacks. I figured a few days away from city life would do both of us good. I was wrong. We left on a Friday afternoon. It was early November. The leaves had turned all sorts of red and gold, and the air was crisp. The drive from Huntsville to Bankhead National Forest took a little over an hour. We carpooled in my SUV to keep the group together, but I let Derek take the wheel. He liked driving fast, which normally made me nervous, but I was too busy looking out the window and thinking about how quiet everything felt. The tension from my divorce still lingered, like an invisible weight on my chest. This trip was supposed to help me breathe again. Lisa sat up front, occasionally pointing out landmarks or interesting back roads. Mark was in the back with me and Rufus, reading something on his phone about local hauntings in Bankhead. Every once in a while, he'd lean forward and mention tidbits about how people had reported sightings of a witch or strange lights in the woods at night. Derek just laughed. "All that stuff is nonsense," he said. But he had a grin that made me suspect he was half hoping we'd see something freaky out there. We arrived at a small parking lot near a trailhead on the southwestern edge of the forest. The sun was already dipping below the horizon, painting the sky orange and red. We grabbed our gear, tents, sleeping bags, flashlights, a portable grill, enough supplies for 2 nights, plus whatever Lisa recommended for emergency scenarios. She was methodical about it, double-checking we had first aid kits, rope, and extra water. Derek teased her for being paranoid, but she just shrugged. "Survival is about preparation," she said. As we stepped onto the trail, Rufus wagged his tail, eager to explore. The plan was to hike a mile or 2 in, find a flat spot near a stream or creek, and set up before dark. We had about an hour of decent light left, so we set a brisk pace. The forest felt peaceful. The canopy overhead was a mix of bare branches and persistent green pines, and the falling leaves crunched under our boots. We found a decent clearing around twilight. It was near a small stream that trickled over smooth rocks. With the last sliver of orange sky, we pitched the tents. 2 tents, each large enough for 2 people, so Mark and Derek in one, Lisa and me in the other. Rufus was fine sleeping anywhere, as long as I was close. By the time we got a fire going, it was dark. Derek snapped some pictures with his phone, but complained that his battery was already draining oddly fast. I checked mine, 75% down to 40% in about an hour. Mark also noticed his phone was burning battery. "Probably just the cold," Lisa said. "Or the forest is haunted," Derek joked, wiggling his fingers. Everyone laughed, except Rufus. He just stared out at the trees, his ears perked. We cooked some quick meals and sat around the fire. Derek pulled out a flask of whiskey, took a swig, and passed it around. I sipped a bit to calm my nerves. Mark told us a little about his uncle's last known campsite. Supposedly, he'd come out here with some friends for a weekend of hunting. On the 3rd day, he just walked into the woods and never came back. No footprints, no signs of struggle, nothing. The entire search party found zilch. The conversation got heavier, so we changed the subject to local legends, old Native American tales, rumored witches, cryptid sightings. Lisa rolled her eyes at most of it, but Mark was fascinated. He read us an excerpt from his phone about a woman named Miriam Cross, some pioneer-era figure who'd been accused of witchcraft. The story said she was hanged but never really died, that her body swung from a tree for 7 days, rotting but refusing to fall. "A tall tale," Derek said. "Probably some old ghost story to scare kids." But he was smiling like he wanted to be scared. Eventually, the fire started sputtering. I tried to add more kindling, but it refused to catch like it should have. I chalked it up to damp wood, even though it felt dry. We decided to call it a night. Lisa made sure we stowed our food in sealed containers away from the tents, so no bears or other animals would harass us. Then we crawled into our sleeping bags, exhausted from the work week, ignoring the creeping chill in the air. I slept fitfully. Rufus kept shifting, letting out low whines like he smelled something. Twice, I heard him growl in his throat, but when I unzipped the tent and shone my flashlight, nothing was there. It was around 2 a.m. when my phone died completely. It had been on airplane mode at about 30% battery, yet it just blinked off with no warning. I remember thinking I'd just recharge it in the morning with a backup battery. Little did I know that none of that would matter soon enough. Morning came slowly. By morning, I mean the world felt dull and gray, and it was at least 8 a.m. before there was enough light to consider it day. It was as if the forest didn't want to wake up. I emerged from the tent to find Derek was gone. His sleeping bag lay empty in his tent, unzipped from the inside. I stepped over and nudged Mark awake. "Hey, where's Derek?" I asked. Mark rubbed his eyes, concerned. "No idea. He was here last night. Maybe he went to relieve himself." We waited 15 minutes. Rufus sniffed the ground but seemed uneasy. Finally, Lisa woke and joined us. "Let's call for him," she said. We wandered the campsite, calling Derek's name, scouring the surrounding trees. We found no footprints near the stream, no sign of him. A cold knot formed in my stomach. It reminded me of Mark's story about his uncle. This was different, I told myself. Derek probably just went for an early morning walk or something. But an hour passed, then another. No Derek. I checked my watch. It read 10:20 a.m. Lisa frowned. "Mine says 8:05, that's weird." Mark's watch was stuck at 7:57. We all assumed the batteries were dying. But how could 3 separate watches malfunction at the same time? Eventually, around what we guessed was noon, Derek strolled back into camp carrying an armload of firewood. "Morning, guys," he said, smiling wide, maybe too wide. "Where the hell were you?" I asked, relief mingling with anger. "We've been looking everywhere." He blinked as if confused. "I just went out for a bit, needed some air, found good firewood." He stared at it like he'd forgotten it was in his arms. "Why?" "You left without saying anything," Lisa said, her voice calm but with an edge. "You had us worried." He cocked his head. "Sorry, didn't realize it was a big deal." He dropped the firewood next to the dead embers of the campfire, then looked at us like he'd forgotten how to start a fire. Usually, Derek jumped at the chance to be the alpha in any group setting, especially when it involved tasks like building a fire. Today, he was passive, smiling oddly. Rufus approached him, sniffing at his boots, then growled, the fur on his neck standing up. Derek just stared down at the dog, not saying a word. It was unnerving enough that I grabbed Rufus's collar and pulled him back, muttering an apology. Derek's lips quirked upward in this too long grin. Then he turned and walked off to rummage through his backpack as if nothing were amiss. That was the second sign something was wrong. The first was the weird time glitch, or maybe that was the third sign, if you counted the spontaneously dead phone batteries. We managed to get a new fire going with some effort, though the flames kept guttering. Lisa tried to make coffee from our water supply. The burner on our portable stove flickered purple instead of orange, and I figured it was a fuel issue. Whatever it was, it made me uneasy. Even water tasted metallic, but we convinced ourselves it was the metal canteen imparting flavor. The rest of the morning we spent exploring close to camp. Mark pointed out a set of barefoot footprints in the mud not far off the trail. But they were missing toe indentations, like each foot ended in a smooth half circle. "Could be an animal," Mark ventured. But we both knew it didn't look like any paw print or hoof print. A sinking feeling caught in my gut, and I deliberately avoided Derek's eyes because he was just standing there, hands slack at his sides, staring at the footprints as if trying to place them. Lisa was up ahead, scouting for a fresh water source because she didn't trust the stream water after that metallic taste. We heard her shout. When we ran to her, we found her staring at a spot on a tree. Someone had carved symbols into the bark. They looked like runes or letters from a language I'd never seen. They spiraled upward, impossible to read. Lisa's lips tightened. "It's probably local kids," she said, but she didn't look convinced. We returned to camp to find that our stock of food had gone bad overnight. The packets of dried jerky smelled rancid, our bread was moldy, and the fruit had turned a sickly black. Lisa cursed under her breath. "This can't be normal. It was fine yesterday." "Do we have enough to last us?" Mark asked, rummaging through the rotting supplies with a look of disgust. "We might have enough for today," she said, "but we'll need to head back tomorrow." At that, Derek laughed. Short, barking laughter that didn't match his usual jovial tone. "What's the rush?" he asked. He was smiling again, that same stretched grin. I can't explain why it made me shiver. Derek was usually a magnet for fun, but now he was radiating malice without saying much. We tried to push through the afternoon, gather more wood, salvage any edible food. Lisa recommended we break camp and move closer to the trailhead, but Derek insisted on staying. Mark was on the fence. He wanted to see if we could salvage the trip, but he also didn't like the idea of ignoring so many red flags. Rufus kept pacing, sniffing at the air like he sensed something. I didn't want to push him too far, so I let him stay by my side while we debated. Finally, we all decided we would at least spend one more night, then hike out in the morning, just as Lisa suggested. We were about to head out to gather more water when Lisa suddenly tensed. "Where's Mark?" she asked. That was when I realized Mark had been standing right with us maybe 10 seconds ago. Now he was gone, no word, no sound. We split up, calling his name. Derek wandered off with that same calm expression, not calling out or seeming worried at all. I stuck with Lisa and Rufus, figuring we had a better chance of finding Mark together. We looked around for almost an hour, stepping through thick undergrowth, following the stream for about half a mile. Nothing. No footprints except those bizarre ones we'd already seen. The sense of déjà vu terrified me. First, Derek vanished in the morning. Now Mark was gone. I couldn't shake the thought of Mark's missing uncle. What if it was happening all over again? When we got back to camp, Derek was there, stoking the fire. Rufus growled as soon as we approached. "Any luck?" Derek asked, feigning concern. The weird grin was still plastered on his face. "No," Lisa said bluntly. "We should search again. The sun will set soon." And indeed, the light was fading rapidly, though it felt like midday might have only just ended. Derek shrugged. "I'll help," he said, his tone flat. He got up and started walking away without waiting for us. We watched him vanish into the trees. I turned to Lisa, about to say something, when Mark stepped into the clearing from the opposite direction. He looked disoriented, eyes darting, as if he'd stumbled into a place he didn't recognize. "Mark!" I called, rushing over. "Where were you?" He stared at me, slow to answer. "Out," he said, blinking too little. "I went out to, get more water." There was no canteen in his hand. Lisa looked at me nervously. "You okay, Mark?" He gave a short nod, but there was a weird tension in his neck, like he was forcing himself not to jerk around. "I'm fine," he replied, mouth twitching in a half-smile. "Why?" "You disappeared for almost an hour," I said. We were worried. He just blinked again, that smile lingering. "I did." Then he took a seat by the fire, ignoring our concerned expressions. Something was deeply wrong with both Derek and Mark now. They occasionally spoke, but their words seemed slightly delayed, as if they were reciting lines. They forgot things we'd just talked about. At one point, Mark asked who Lisa was, though we'd all driven here together, and they'd known each other for years. Lisa whispered to me, "We can't stay another night. We should leave now, even if it's dark." I wanted to agree, but when I looked at the sky, I realized it was already nearly night, even though it felt like it should have been early afternoon. The sun had dropped below the tree line like it was in a hurry to leave. Checking the forest trail in the dark, without a functioning GPS or phone, seemed suicidal, but staying here was no better. I turned to the tents, thinking we could pack up quickly and at least start heading back to the car with flashlights. That was when the final shred of normality slipped away. Both our tents were unzipped from the inside, and nobody was in them. The sleeping bags themselves were turned inside out, as if they had been yanked through themselves. Everything looked disheveled. My spare clothes were strewn around, and Rufus's dog bowl was flipped, the water inside it gone. "Who did this?" I muttered aloud. Lisa shook her head. We both turned to Derek and Mark, who were sitting by the flickering fire. Derek looked at me and said, "I don't understand the question." His voice was empty, hollow, and it raised the hairs on my arms. Lisa put a hand on my shoulder, eyes wide. "We need to go now," she whispered. But even as she said it, the temperature dropped so suddenly that I could see my breath plume into the air. The fire sputtered, throwing sparks that danced with eerie green and purple colors. My watch read 3:15 p.m., but the sky overhead was pitch black except for a faint glow to the west. "Let's gather what we can," I told Lisa, "and just start walking. I'll carry Mark's pack if I need to." We turned back to the fire to announce we were leaving. That's when Mark lurched to his feet and grabbed Lisa's wrist, holding it so tight his knuckles went white. "We can't leave," he hissed. His eyes looked wrong. The pupils too large, the whites bloodshot. His neck twitched in a jerky motion like a glitch in a video game. Rufus let out a savage bark, teeth bared, and lunged at Mark. Mark snapped his head around unnaturally quickly, saw the dog coming, and released Lisa just in time to stumble back. Rufus nearly sank his teeth into Mark's arm. Mark laughed, a hollow, shaky sound that made my insides twist. He retreated to the other side of the clearing, standing near Derek, who hadn't moved. Lisa's voice trembled as she thanked Rufus under her breath. I signaled for her to stay close. "Guys," I said carefully, "let's just calm down. Something's not right here." Derek tilted his head. "Something is wrong with time," he said, each word hitting the air like stones. "But that's okay, it's okay, we'll be here for a while." He reached for something in his pocket, a small hunting knife. My pulse pounded. Derek was usually too reckless, but I'd never felt fear around him before. Now he was terrifying. Rufus growled at him, ears flattened. I tried to keep my voice steady. "Let's all put down weapons, okay?" Derek didn't answer. Instead, he drifted closer to Mark. They both stood there, side by side, near the edge of the firelight. The flickering flames illuminated their faces, and I swear to God, for half a second, I thought I saw a third face superimposed on them. A gaunt, hollow-eyed woman with ragged black hair. My heart seized. I blinked, and it was gone. Derek and Mark looked normal again except for their vacant stares. Lisa was shaking. I realized she was gripping her own hunting knife, knuckles white. "We have to leave," she said under her breath. "We can't wait until morning. This place, this forest, it's not right." We inched backward toward the tents. I began to hastily gather a few essential items: water canteens, flashlights, a lighter, a first aid kit. Half our supplies were ruined or missing. The dried food was rotted. The fresh stuff we'd brought was covered in mold. Everything smelled faintly of damp earth, even inside zip-locked bags. Rufus whined again and pressed against my leg. Mark stepped forward. "Lisa," he said softly, "Jack, don't go." The tone was so gentle it sent a chill up my spine. "We'll be safer here by the fire, together." Lisa aimed her flashlight at Mark's face. He flinched at the brightness. "I've had enough," she said. "Jack, you ready?" I nodded, slinging my half-packed bag over my shoulder. "Yes, let's—" Mark dashed forward, too fast, and reached for Lisa's knife. She reacted by slashing upward, catching his forearm. He howled, a strangely high-pitched sound. Blood darkened his jacket sleeve. We both jumped back. Derek rushed in next, brandishing his own knife, but Rufus intercepted him, snapping at his legs. Derek kicked Rufus, sending him yelping, but at least it kept Derek from plunging his knife into me. That was the moment everything devolved into chaos. I shouted at Lisa to run. She bolted into the trees. Rufus recovered and lunged for Derek again, locking his jaws onto Derek's calf. Derek screamed, though it sounded as much outraged as pained, and hammered at Rufus's head with the butt of his knife. My heart hammered. Rufus was in danger. I swung my flashlight at Derek's face, hoping to stun him. The heavy aluminum connected with his temple, and he stumbled. The dog let go, and Derek sagged to one knee, wheezing. Mark's ragged breathing sounded behind me. I turned to see him gripping his slashed arm. Blood smeared across his hand and in his eyes. Something like mania. He was smiling, tears streaming down his face. "Don't leave," Mark said, each word forced through clenched teeth. I felt Lisa tug my arm. She'd come back for me. "Jack, come on." Grabbing Rufus's collar, I sprinted with Lisa into the forest. Our flashlights bobbed, illuminating branches and dead leaves. My mind was spinning. Derek and Mark, my friends, had turned violent. They were possessed, insane or something. If we didn't get out quickly, we might end up just like them. Or worse. "Which way?" I gasped. I had no sense of direction. The trees looked identical, and the night felt impenetrable. "Towards the road," Lisa hissed, not sounding fully confident. She glanced at her compass. "Damn it, it's not moving." She slapped it. The needle spun in a slow circle. Behind us, I heard faint, shrieking laughter echo through the trees. The voice was feminine, but also layered with something deeper. My stomach lurched. Were Derek and Mark chasing us, or was that something else? We pressed on. The forest grew darker, the canopy overhead blocking out the moon. The flashlights struggled to pierce the gloom, as if the shadows themselves were solid. Fallen branches snagged at our ankles. I was panting, my breath steaming in the cold. Lisa was trying to keep the compass steady while glancing at a battered old map. "We should have hit the trailhead by now," she muttered through chattering teeth. "This doesn't make sense. Where is it?" I glanced at my watch, though I was sure it was useless. It showed 4:10 p.m. No date, no movement. Just frozen numbers. Time was broken here. Suddenly, Rufus sniffed the air and let out a sharp bark. I froze, shining my flashlight ahead. A shape loomed, a massive oak tree with twisted roots. It was bigger than any tree I'd seen in these woods before. Lisa held her flashlight up, revealing twisted limbs overhead. Tattered strips of cloth hung from one branch, fluttering in a wind we couldn't feel. My scalp prickled. Were those rags, or was it something else? That's when I saw what looked like a long rope or vine dangling from the highest branch. It swayed slightly. I had the horrible realization that it was a noose. My breath caught. I thought of the old story Mark read to us, Miriam Cross, the pioneer woman accused of witchcraft, supposedly hanged but never truly dead. Rufus whined, tail tucked. Lisa swallowed hard, then tried to lead us around the tree. That's when we heard a voice behind us. "Jackson." It was a whisper, but it carried like thunder. A woman's voice, throaty and old, but strangely seductive. My heart pounded. We spun around to see a figure step out from behind the oak. A woman, skeletal, skin so pale it was almost translucent. She wore a torn, mud-stained dress that might have been white once, centuries ago. Her eyes were deep hollows in her face like twin voids. Ragged black hair clung to her gaunt cheeks. She opened her mouth and I thought I'd see teeth, but they were just black gums. Rufus whimpered. "Miriam," Lisa breathed. The figure twitched, as if hearing the name triggered something. Then she grinned in a way that no human face should. "You came. she said. Or maybe that was just in my head. Her lips barely moved. Why did you come to my woods? I felt something in my mind like cold fingers probing. I shuddered, stepping back. Lisa raised her knife, but Miriam just stared at it, unimpressed. Then she lifted a bony hand, beckoning. I thought I heard Mark's voice in the distance, screaming. Then Derek's laughter joined it, my heart hammered. I realized we were cornered between the monstrous oak and this ghastly witch. Either we tried to bolt and risk running into Derek and Mark, or we faced Miriam. She took a step toward us. That's when Lisa hurled her knife at Miriam's chest in a desperate move. The blade sank in, up to the hilt, but the witch didn't even flinch. She grinned wider, her hollow eyes flickering with some unholy light. With a sickening noise, she pulled the knife out and tossed it aside as if discarding a broken toy. Lisa grabbed my arm. "Run, Jack!" she cried. But before we could move, Miriam lunged forward with impossible speed, grabbing Lisa's wrist and yanking her close. Lisa screamed, dropping her flashlight. I fumbled for my own knife, but Miriam lifted Lisa off the ground as though she weighed nothing. "Jackson!" Lisa shrieked, but her voice choked off as Miriam clamped a hand around her throat. I saw Lisa's eyes roll back, her limbs jerking. Rufus barked frantically, but he seemed too scared to attack. I forced myself to move, to do something. I lunged, knife in hand, and slashed at Miriam's arm. It felt like cutting into leather. She hissed, more annoyed than hurt, but her grip on Lisa loosened just enough for Lisa to tumble free. I grabbed Lisa under the arms, pulling her away, but she wasn't responding. Her eyes were half open, unfocused. Miriam turned her hollow gaze to me. Stay," she whispered, her voice swirling with echoes. Her free hand snapped up, clawed fingers reaching for my face. I threw my arm up and felt her nails rake across my forearm, searing pain lancing through me. I cried out, stumbling backward with Lisa's limp weight in my arms. Rufus, perhaps realizing I was in danger, bared his teeth and leapt at Miriam's back. He sank his jaws into her shoulder. She screamed, a hideous, piercing sound that made my ears ring. She swatted at Rufus like an insect, but he held on, growling fiercely. I didn't waste time. I picked Lisa up as best I could, slinging her arm over my shoulder and staggered away from that oak. We ran. Or rather, I half-carried Lisa while Rufus trotted beside us. My arm throbbed from the witch's claw marks, and Lisa seemed barely conscious, her legs wobbling. I noticed a cut on her throat, thin but bleeding. She coughed, trying to form words. Thank you." "It's okay," I panted. "Just keep moving." Adrenaline propelled us through the forest, but the darkness felt suffocating. Every so often I thought I heard slithering behind us, or the snap of a twig. Then I'd whirl around with my flashlight, but nothing was there. Lisa was regaining some strength, enough to shuffle forward on her own, though she kept stumbling. We didn't know where we were going. We just knew we had to put distance between us and that oak. Eventually, we spotted flickering light ahead. I was half hoping it was a rescue, or maybe the headlights of a ranger's truck. Instead, it was our campfire. Somehow, we had circled back to our own campsite. I stood there, chest heaving, feeling despair set in. The battered tents, the rotted supplies, the weird footprints in the mud. We were right back where we started, as if the forest wouldn't let us leave. The fire glowed a weak orange, surrounded by the shapes of Derek and Mark. They sat by the fire watching us approach. Mark was hunched over, blood still dripping from his slashed arm. Derek had dried blood on his temple from when I hit him. Neither looked alarmed that we'd returned. They didn't move either, just stared with that vacant, eerie calm. Lisa let out a weak groan. "No," she whispered. No, this can't be real." I helped her to a log near the edge of the campsite so she could sit. Rufus sat beside us, panting, his muzzle flecked with dark fluid. I didn't know if it was Miriam's blood, Derek's, or something else. For a moment, no one spoke. The fire crackled, sending embers drifting into the black sky. Finally, Derek turned to Mark and spoke in a hushed tone. "They're back," he said. Mark didn't answer. He was trembling, his head down. Then he giggled softly. "She's coming," he said. Lisa tried to stand, but her legs buckled. I caught her. "We can't stay," she murmured in my ear. "They're lost. The forest is lost." She looked so pale, and the cut at her throat was still bleeding. I pressed a piece of cloth against it, trying to stanch the flow. We were both running on fumes. I heard Derek's footsteps in the leaves. He walked toward us, knife still in hand. My pulse surged. I had no idea how to reason with him anymore. "Stay back," I warned, rummaging for my flashlight or any weapon. I was out of breath, out of courage. He gave me that too long smile. Then his eyes went wide. He lunged at Lisa with the knife raised. I shoved her aside and blocked his arm with mine, feeling the blade bite into my forearm. Pain flared, hot and agonizing. Rufus barked in rage and lunged, but Derek jerked away, swatting the dog. We tumbled to the ground in a heap. Derek ended up on top, pressing the knife toward my throat. My arms shook as I held his wrist at bay. Just then, a savage bark sounded, and Rufus latched onto Derek's shoulder, ripping him backward. Derek howled, losing his grip on the knife. I scrambled free, grabbing the blade off the ground. My head was spinning from blood loss and terror. Derek swung his fist at Rufus's head, connecting with a sickening thud. Rufus yelped and let go, stumbling. Before Derek could strike him again, I stepped behind Derek and thrust the knife toward his back. I didn't want to kill him. I just wanted to stop him. But the adrenaline took over, and the blade sank in. Derek gasped, arching his back. A moment later, he slumped to his knees, turning to look at me with wide, stunned eyes. A gurgling noise escaped his mouth. Blood trickled over his lips. My heart felt like it would explode. I wanted to shout an apology, do something, but there was no time. Derek toppled forward, unmoving. Rufus whimpered, nudging Derek's side. I stifled a sob. Derek had been my friend, but he had tried to kill me, kill Lisa, kill Mark. Or maybe it wasn't really Derek anymore at that point. My brain spun, trying to rationalize what I'd just done. Mark stood up and slowly, almost thoughtfully, walked over to Derek's corpse. He stared at it for a long moment, then bent down and dipped his fingers in Derek's blood. With a shaky, manic grin, he traced symbols on his own cheeks. I felt revulsion twist my stomach. Mark lifted his gaze to me. "You can't escape her," he said. "She's in my head." I was trembling, the knife still in my hand. "Mark, fight it," I pleaded. "You have to fight it." He giggled again, tears streaming down his face. Then, in a burst of motion, he snatched Derek's dropped knife and lunged at me. I braced for another fight, but Rufus sprang at Mark's ankles. Mark stabbed downward, plunging the blade into Rufus's side. The dog let out a heart-wrenching yelp. Something in me snapped. I roared in rage, ignoring the pain in my arm, and tackled Mark. We crashed onto the muddy ground. He tried to bring the knife up, but I slammed my flashlight across his jaw. He gasped, his eyes rolling back. For a second, he went limp. Then he coughed, blinking rapidly. "Jack!" he rasped, voice wavering. Where am I?" A flicker of the old Mark, maybe. I almost felt hope, until a crooked grin curled his lips. His eyes darkened again. I realized Mark was gone. This was just a shell. I raised my own blade, pressing it against his throat, tears burning in my eyes. I couldn't do this again, but I remembered Rufus's agonized cry. Lisa's bleeding throat, Derek's body in the dirt. If I didn't stop Mark now, would he kill me? Or worse, Lisa. Forgive me, I whispered. He opened his mouth, but before he could speak, I slashed hard. Blood gushed, spraying my hands. Mark's body went rigid, then relaxed, eyes glazing over. I choked back the urge to vomit as I eased off him. I heard a weak whine behind me. Rufus lay on his side, the knife still in him. Lisa crawled over, tears in her eyes. "He's hurt bad," she said, voice trembling. "We have to get him out of here," I said, panicked. "Can you walk?" She nodded weakly. Together, we gripped the handle of the knife in Rufus's side. "I'm sorry, buddy," I murmured, and pulled it free. He whimpered, but the wound wasn't immediately gushing blood. Maybe it was a shallow stab. I ripped a piece of my shirt and pressed it against the wound, trying to stop the bleeding. Rufus's eyes rolled, but he licked my hand. "Let's go," Lisa insisted, her voice hoarse. We staggered away from the campsite, supporting Rufus as best we could. We had no sense of direction, but we refused to stay in that cursed spot. Somehow, the forest looked a fraction lighter, like dawn might be approaching. Or maybe it was just the dull glow of a moon hidden behind clouds. My mind was half gone with exhaustion, grief, and a swirling horror that felt impossible. We stumbled for what felt like hours. My watch was a dead face on my wrist. Eventually, we saw a flicker of light through the trees. Flashlights, or maybe headlights. I don't remember how we got there, but the next thing I knew, we emerged onto a dirt road. Relief surged through me so strongly that my knees buckled. I fell to the ground, panting. A figure approached, shining a flashlight in my eyes. I squinted, adrenaline spiking again. But then I realized it was a ranger's uniform. A female park ranger, early 30s, black hair, strong build. She knelt by me and Lisa, asking if we were injured. "We had a call about missing campers," she said. "We've been searching for a day, are you—" But her words cut off when her flashlight beam fell on Rufus's bleeding side, the blood all over Lisa's throat, and my arms covered in claw marks. "My God," she whispered. "We'll get you out of here. I have a truck down the road." Lisa let out a sob of relief, burying her face in her hands. I practically cried in gratitude. The ranger hoisted Lisa up, supporting her, and beckoned me to follow. Rufus limped, leaning heavily against my leg, but we moved forward. After a short walk, we reached a parked truck. It was brown and battered, with the official park insignia. I saw a first aid kit in the back seat. The ranger helped us into the truck, setting Rufus carefully on the floor. I sank against the seat, tears pricking my eyes. We were safe. We had escaped. Then the ranger slid into the driver's seat, turning her face so I could see it clearly under the dome light. My blood ran cold. It was Lisa. Her hair was the same, her uniform crisp. But Lisa, my Lisa, was sitting next to me, half-conscious, bloody, and battered. How could there be two Lisas? The ranger turned and smiled at me. Too long of a smile, blinking too little. My breath caught in my throat. "Are you lost?" she asked gently, voice echoing with a familiar hush. I realized I'd seen that same twisted grin on Mark and Derek. A single drop of black liquid dripped from her mouth, staining her chin. My heart thundered as I looked at Lisa beside me, who was drifting in and out of consciousness, oblivious to the impossibility in front of us. The ranger started the engine. The truck headlights flicked on, illuminating a winding dirt road through the trees. She turned to me again, that grin widening until it nearly split her face. I sat there, paralyzed, unsure if I should leap out of the truck or cling to the seat. Rufus let out a low whine, but he was too weak to move. "Don't worry," said the ranger, her voice layered with something else. "I'll take care of you." I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. The last thing I remember was the truck rolling forward into the dark, the branches overhead twisting like skeletal fingers, and my heart pounding in my ears. That's all I can manage to recount. Maybe it ends with dread, maybe it ends with closure in some twisted sense. All I know is that night never left me. Every time I close my eyes, I see Derek's face, contorted in betrayal and madness. I see Mark's final anguished grin. I see Lisa limp in my arms. And then I see that ranger, that duplicate Lisa with black ichor dripping from her mouth. I survived, obviously, or at least part of me did. The doctors told me a couple of hikers found me on the dirt road early the next morning, alone and delirious. Lisa was nowhere to be seen. Rufus lay beside me, still breathing, but barely. I don't remember any of that. My next clear memory was waking up in a hospital bed, bandaged and half-conscious. They said I was in shock, dehydrated, and had multiple infected wounds. Rufus recovered, but he still startles at shadows. When search teams went back, they never found Derek's or Mark's bodies. No sign of Lisa either, alive or dead. The authorities chalked it up to a tragedy in the wilderness. They tried to piece together a story of an animal attack, maybe a psychotic break among the group. Nothing made sense. Local legends carried on, and I heard rumors from other hikers about a skeletal woman in the forest, about seeing old runes carved on the trees. But no official explanation was ever given. I'm telling this story now, as best I can, because I'm done trying to convince myself it never happened. I don't expect anyone to believe me. But if you ever find yourself in Bankhead National Forest, especially in late autumn, when daylight dies too soon, do yourself a favor. If you hear a whisper calling your name, or find footprints with no toes, or discover your map twisting in your hands, leave. Don't wait until the sun sets. Don't let the forest unravel time around you, or let your friends vanish only to return wrong. I can't tell you that escaping guarantees safety. Even now, when I walk Rufus at dusk near my home, sometimes I catch a glimpse of a figure in the corner of my eye. A tall, ragged woman smiling at me from the tree line. And in those moments, I swear I hear Lisa's voice, or Derek's or Mark's, calling me, asking me to come back. I won't go back, ever. But I'm not sure that matters, because once you've seen the hollow woman, she never really leaves you. And sometimes, I wonder if part of me never left those cursed woods in the first place. My name is Nate Holloway. I'm 29 years old. This happened in late October of 2022, when I decided to leave my problems behind for a few days and head into the Sipsy wilderness of Alabama. I want to warn you that nothing about what I'm about to share is pleasant. Sometimes, I still wonder if it really happened, or if my mind fractured under stress. But I have the scars, and a few other reminders, to prove otherwise. I live in Birmingham, and I've worked as a mechanical engineer for 7 years. My job isn't the problem, though it can be stressful. I planned this trip because I was crawling out of a bad breakup with a woman I'd dated for 3 years. Around the time she moved out, I felt like I was drowning in my own apartment, in my own life. Work was suffocating. The city felt too loud, and I just wanted quiet. So I did what too many people do when they need clarity. I turned to nature, as if the forest could heal me. I'm not a particularly skilled outdoorsman, but I've camped enough times to know how to pitch a tent and start a fire. Still, I'd never camped alone for multiple nights, especially not in an area as remote as the Sipsy. I'd gone to Chaha with friends once, and we stuck to well-traveled trails. But I wanted real solitude this time, so I picked a remote spot along the Sipsy River, miles from the busier trailheads. I wasn't completely by myself, though. I had my best companion, Boone. He's a 6-year-old German shepherd, big and fiercely loyal. Ever since he was a puppy, he's been my shadow, following me around the house, waiting by the door whenever I leave, and jumping around me like I'm his entire world. Our bond is so strong that I thought having him with me would make any trip feel safe. That morning, I loaded my car with the gear: a decent tent, a warm sleeping bag, some freeze-dried meals, a camp stove, and a portable GPS unit. I brought physical maps too, just in case. I'd read about how phone signals can be patchy up there, so I charged my phone fully, but I wasn't expecting coverage once we got deep in the wilderness. I headed out early, around 6 a.m., so I could have most of the day to find the perfect campsite and set up before dark. The drive took a few hours. I left paved roads behind for gravel, and from gravel, I turned onto a deeply rutted dirt path that rattled my old SUV and made Boone growl softly in the back seat. Eventually, I found a small, unofficial parking area. There were no other vehicles. The air smelled like wet leaves and distant pine. It was the perfect kind of quiet. Just the rush of wind through the trees and a few bird calls. Boone hopped out eagerly, tail wagging, sniffing at everything. I took one last glance at the phone. Full battery, but zero reception. That was expected. I clipped the phone to my belt, strapped on my backpack, then secured Boone's harness. A little excitement buzzed through me as we started walking. I felt like I was leaving the weight of the breakup behind. The trail, or at least what passed for one, was narrow and winding. There were patches of sunlight filtering through the canopy, but also long stretches of dense shade. The Sipsy is sometimes called the land of 1,000 waterfalls, and I could already hear water rushing somewhere to my right, out of sight but not too far away. That was the direction I wanted to head. The plan was to follow the river for a while, then veer off and set up camp near a small waterfall I'd read about. I felt a flicker of excitement, an almost childlike anticipation of finding a hidden place that belonged only to me and Boone for a few days. We walked for 2 hours, stopping occasionally to sip water or check the GPS. Around noon, the GPS started acting weird. I stopped in a clearing, rummaging for the device. The screen had lines of static, like an old TV set. I turned it off and back on, no luck. The green progress bar for satellite lock was pinned at 0. Boone pawed at my leg, impatient to keep moving, so I muttered a curse at the device and stuffed it back into my pack. I pulled out a paper map. I'm no expert, but I can read a topographic map well enough to orient myself. I tried to figure out where we might be by matching the bends in the river to the lines on the page, but the shape of the river in front of me didn't line up with the map's curves. It was almost like the water was taking a course that didn't exist on the paper. I spent about 10 minutes telling myself I'd made a simple mistake, maybe reading the map upside down or mixing up one tributary for another. Eventually, I gave up trying to confirm my exact position. The river was on my right, so I decided to rely on that. It would keep me from getting hopelessly lost. We pressed on, the day warming enough that I stripped off my jacket and tied it around my waist. By late afternoon, I found a likely spot to camp, a wide, flat space near a bend in the river. A series of short waterfalls tumbled over mossy rocks, creating a gentle roar that covered the hush of the forest. It was beautiful, though the shadows under the trees were growing long and dark, like waiting silhouettes. I pitched my tent quickly, tossing my sleeping bag inside and unrolling a foam pad. The day felt like it had slipped by too fast, so I checked my watch. It read a little after 4 p.m. That gave me enough time to collect wood for a fire and filter some water from the river before dusk. After I'd gathered an armful of firewood, I dug a small fire pit, ringed it with rocks, and got the flames going. Right away, though, something was off. The fire didn't want to catch. I had tinder, I had perfectly dry kindling, but every time the flames started to lick upward, they died as if smothered by an invisible hand. I must have tried lighting it 4 or 5 times before it took. When it finally did ignite, the flames looked wrong. They flared in a pale blue, then snapped over to green for a few seconds. I sat there, eyebrows raised, wondering if there was copper or some chemical on the wood. Boone, who normally loves lying close to the warmth, kept his distance, pacing around the edge of the clearing. I tried to ignore the weirdness of the fire, telling myself it was some mineral in the local wood. For dinner, I boiled water for a freeze-dried meal. I set out a bowl of kibble for Boone, but he wouldn't eat until the flames had settled into a more normal orange. Even then, he gulped his food quickly, ears perked up, as if expecting something to leap out of the trees. Darkness came fast in that thick forest. One moment, the sky was a golden twilight. The next, it was inky black, with just a faint glow from the crescent moon above. The river was an endless murmur, and for the first time all day I felt a genuine sense of aloneness that was both exhilarating and unsettling. I took my phone out to use its flashlight, but it was dead. Not low battery, dead. No sign of life. I tried turning it on, but nothing happened. I'd fully charged it that morning, so it should have at least some juice left. I guessed maybe it had a software glitch or the cold had drained it. Using a small LED headlamp, I slipped into the tent with Boone. After a day of hiking, I felt physically tired but mentally restless. I remember lying on my back, listening to the forest outside, the crackle of the dying fire, the rush of the river. I dozed a bit. Sometime later, I snapped awake. Boone was standing, ears rigid, staring at the tent door. The fire outside was just a faint red glow. I listened. There was a gentle sound of water, wind in the leaves, and something else, a soft dripping, like footsteps in shallow water. I unzipped the tent door slowly, shining my headlamp around. Nothing but the dark. The beam of light swung across the tree trunks and I saw no eye shine, no movement. But the sense of being watched was overwhelming, a deep prickle at the back of my neck. Boone never barked, but he continued to growl, a low rumble in his chest that I'd rarely heard before. Eventually, I convinced myself it was just the usual forest noises, maybe a raccoon or deer. I zipped the tent again, patted Boone, and tried to sleep. When I woke, it was from some half-remembered dream involving a woman's voice calling my name over and over. The inside of the tent was stifling, and the air tasted stale. I crawled out into the dim light of dawn, or what I assumed was dawn. The sky was a sickly grayish-green, like a stormy morning. A heavy fog drifted over the river, giving everything a haze. My watch said 8:15 a.m., but the sun didn't look like it was anywhere near as high as it should have been. The gloom might have been from the thick cloud cover, I reasoned. I checked my campsite. The fire pit was cold, not even the faintest wisp of smoke. My backpack, which I'd left propped against a tree, was gone. At first, I thought I was just being forgetful. Maybe I'd put it inside the tent, but it wasn't there either. My heart jumped. I scoured the area, calling Boone to sniff around. Nothing. Eventually, I found it hanging from a low branch of a cypress tree about 50 feet into the woods. It was unzipped, and the contents, food, a spare shirt, my water filter, were scattered on the ground. A wave of relief hit me, followed immediately by confusion. Who would do that? A prankster? A thief? An animal, maybe? But how would an animal hoist the pack onto a branch neatly like that? I inspected the pack. Everything inside was soggy, and the freeze-dried meals were covered in an oily black film. They smelled rotten, like they'd been left out to spoil for weeks. My water filter was in pieces, the plastic cracked, as though it had been stomped on. My spare shirt was wet, riddled with something that looked like footprints, except they were too slender, too long, like elongated human feet. Shaken, I stuffed what I could salvage into the backpack. Boone was sniffing around the trunk of the cypress, whining under his breath. His hackles were raised. I felt like I'd stumbled into a scene I wasn't supposed to see. I decided then that we should pack up and go. The moment I stepped back into the campsite to take down the tent, though, a voice called out, "Hello? Hey!" I turned to see a man standing at the edge of the clearing. He was tall, with dark hair and a well-worn hiking pack. His clothes looked a little dirty, like he'd been on the trail for a while, and his tone was friendly but subdued. "Hey," I replied, forcing a smile that I didn't feel. "You out here alone too?" He nodded. "Name's Josh Calloway." He stepped closer, noticing Boone. "Friendly dog?" "Mostly," I said. He's been a little on edge. Josh stopped a few yards away, letting Boone sniff the air. "Yeah, well, can't blame him out here, no shortage of strange sounds." He gave a slight chuckle. "You mind if I rest a bit at your fire pit?" A little part of me bristled. I was already tense from finding my pack strung up like some twisted joke, but he seemed normal enough, and part of me was relieved not to be entirely alone. "Sure," I said. He dropped his pack with a groan and sat on a rock near my cold fire pit. As I started taking down my tent, we chatted. He claimed he'd been out for 2 nights already, exploring deeper sections of the wilderness for photography, but he'd gotten turned around and ended up crossing the river more times than he intended. His phone wasn't working either, and his map didn't make sense. That caught my attention. "My GPS went nuts yesterday," I said, rolling up the tent. "And my phone's been dead, it doesn't even switch on." "Same here," he replied. I figured the battery was shot, but I tried charging it with a portable charger. Nothing. We exchanged uncomfortable glances. Something was definitely off, but neither of us wanted to say it out loud, that the forest itself might be messing with us. People talk about losing track of time or direction in the woods, but this felt different, like the whole environment was pushing back. We decided to walk together for a while, at least until we found a more recognizable trail or a landmark. Maybe, we thought, 2 heads were better than 1, and if we were dealing with some weirdo messing with my supplies, it was probably safer not to be alone. I hoisted Boone's harness onto him, shouldered my half-emptied pack, and we set off. The air was still thick with that eerie fog, and the morning never seemed to brighten. Josh asked if we should wait for the sun to burn off the fog, but I shook my head. Waiting around felt like a bad idea. We followed the river north, or what I believed was north. At times, the bank was rocky and easy to traverse. Other times, we had to duck under low branches or climb slick embankments. The hush of the forest seemed deeper than I'd ever known. No birds sang, and the wind barely rustled the leaves. As we walked, I noticed that my watch was acting oddly. Sometimes I'd glance at it and it showed 9 a.m. Other times it jumped to 11:15 a.m., then back to 9:45 a.m. My sense of time was unraveling. Boone kept close to me, sometimes whining, sometimes stopping in the trail to stare at the water, as if seeing something just beneath the surface. We pressed on for what felt like hours. Eventually, we found a spot that looked suitable for a break, some flat rocks near a shallow part of the river. Josh set his pack down and went to gather some firewood, wanting to boil water and maybe heat a meal. I stayed behind to sort through my gear and check on Boone's paws. Boone kept pacing in circles, sniffing at the ground. He was restless in a way I'd never seen. Normally, if I'm sitting, he'll lie down next to me. But not this time. It unnerved me. 20 minutes passed, then 30. Josh didn't return. I started to worry he might have gotten lost or hurt. I called his name a few times, but the thick trees swallowed my voice. I was just getting ready to pack up and search for him when I heard the crunch of leaves underfoot. I turned, expecting to see Josh lugging some firewood. He walked into the clearing empty-handed. I remember that detail clearly. He hadn't brought back a single branch. He was moving slowly, like he wasn't entirely sure of his own body. It was subtle at first. A slight stiffness in his posture, a blankness in his eyes. "Hey, you all right?" I asked, setting down my pack. Josh just stared at me. He blinked once, too slowly, and a small smile curved his lips. Yeah, he said, almost stammering. "Fine, just got..." turned around. Boone growled at him. Not the curious bark he gives strangers, but a deep, guttural warning. I'd never heard that intensity in Boone's growl before. "You find any wood?" I asked, eyeing his empty hands. Josh looked down at them as if surprised to see them bare. "Must have dropped it," he murmured. "I can go back." He was staring at me too intently, like he was sizing me up or studying my face. Something about his eyes was off. Dilated pupils, a lost look that made me uneasy. He closed them for a second, shook his head, and smiled again. That same too-slow grin. "Nah, don't worry about it," I said, trying to sound casual. "We'll manage without a fire." Boone continued to growl. Inching closer to me, I could feel the fur on his back bristling under my hand. Josh took a step forward. "Your dog's name is Boone, right?" I swallowed. "Yeah." Josh's stare drifted to Boone. "He's a good dog," he murmured, almost to himself. "Strong." I nodded, glancing around, feeling the tension climb. My instincts screamed that something was very, very wrong. Josh's face twitched, and for a moment I saw something else behind his eyes, a hunger or a cold recognition that made my stomach twist. Then he blinked rapidly and shrugged, as if trying to shake off a daze. "Let's keep going," he said. We gathered our things. I clipped Boone's leash to his harness, more for my own comfort than anything. Josh walked ahead, occasionally glancing back with that eerie, unblinking stare. The further we hiked, the darker the forest felt, even though it was still day by my watch. Eventually, we came across a small clearing with a solitary, twisted cypress tree near the water's edge. The bark was peeled in places, revealing pale wood beneath. Josh stopped abruptly. He stood there, breathing heavily. I need to rest," he said, his voice trembling slightly. Boone barked, a sharp sound. Something about that tree made me uneasy. It looked like it had been struck by lightning or diseased in some way. The trunk was gnarled, its branches hanging low, draped in moss that almost looked like hair. Josh walked right up to the tree, placing a hand on the bark. His head cocked to one side as if he were listening. Then he pressed his cheek against the trunk, eyes half closed. My blood went cold. "Josh?" He jerked back, stumbling away from the tree, a wild look on his face. "She wants the dog." I froze. "What?" Josh looked at me, confusion and terror flickering across his features. I don't know why I said that." He clutched his head with both hands like he was in pain. That was when I noticed black droplets of water trickling from his left ear, like swamp water seeping out. My heart hammered so loud I could feel it in my throat. "We need to move," I said firmly. "Josh, come on, let's get out of here." He nodded but didn't look at me. He just stared at Boone. Lips parted slightly. We started walking again, and I kept Boone close. Every muscle in my body tensed. Occasionally, I'd catch Josh muttering under his breath, words I couldn't make out, but it sounded like he was arguing with himself. After about half an hour, though time had become so unreliable, I insisted we make camp. We were losing light again, or so it seemed, and even though I wanted nothing more than to leave those woods entirely, I worried about stumbling in the dark with no real sense of direction. We found a spot near the river that was somewhat open. I hurried through setting up the tent, not wanting to be without shelter if Josh's condition deteriorated further. He stood around, offering no help, just watching me with that unsettling stare. When I finished, I unrolled my sleeping bag and crawled inside to test it, only to find the bag was already unzipped from the inside. I could feel the tang of fear in my mouth, metallic and bitter. There's no way I unzipped it like that after the last use. It was as if someone or something had been inside it, then left. I glanced at Josh, who was pacing at the edge of the campsite. Boone wouldn't let him near the tent. The dog would stand at the entrance, ears flattened, growling low whenever Josh approached. Darkness settled in. I tried to start another fire, but the wood felt damp, even though it hadn't rained. The small flames that finally caught flickered an unnatural green before flaring into a weak orange. I heated some water in a metal cup to make instant coffee, hoping the warmth would steady my nerves. The entire time, Josh just stood there. He never asked for coffee or food. He didn't mention being hungry. Later, he finally spoke up. "I'm going to go wash up," he said, "down by the water." I considered telling him not to, but part of me needed a break from his presence. Maybe the fresh water would snap him out of his trance. "All right," I said, "but be careful." He disappeared into the darkness, heading toward the river. Boone started whining once Josh was gone. I felt the whine echo in my chest. For a moment, I actually considered packing up and fleeing right then, but I didn't have a good sense of where we were, and traveling at night with a single flashlight seemed suicidal. Minutes passed. I waited, listening to the water, the rustle of leaves, my own heart pounding in my ears. I tried to make sense of it all. The rotted food, the weird footprints, the time glitches, Josh's transformation, and that strange phrase, "She wants the dog." That was when I heard the voice out on the river. A woman's voice, humming softly. It drifted through the night like a lullaby. I strained my ears trying to place it. It sounded gentle at first, then warped, rising to a high-pitched squeal that made my skin crawl. Boone barked, hackles raised, and I realized the humming was coming closer. Josh emerged from the darkness. His hair was soaked, and rivulets of black water trickled down his neck. His eyes were wide, manic. He had a smile on his face that stretched too far, like a grimace of pain. I stood up, backing away instinctively. "Josh, what the hell's going on?" His voice came out in two tones, overlapping each other. One was Josh's, the other was something else, something feminine and ancient. "She's here," he said, or they said. "She's so hungry." My lungs felt like they couldn't expand. "Who's hungry?" He stepped forward, water dripping off his clothes. "Maud," he said, eyes rolling back into his head. "She's been calling you." Boone let out a ferocious bark and lunged, but I held him back by the harness. I didn't want him biting a man who might still be salvageable. But then Josh brandished a hunting knife I hadn't realized he was carrying. He looked at Boone with a cold, analytical stare. "Give the dog to her. Maybe she'll let us go." Before I could respond, he lunged at Boone. The dog jerked backward, snarling, while I scrambled to get between them. Josh was inhumanly strong, far stronger than a man his size had any right to be. He knocked me aside with his free hand, sending me sprawling against the ground. Boone bit down on Josh's arm, but Josh didn't even react to pain. He swung the knife toward Boone's throat. I screamed and dove for Josh's wrist, managing to yank it back just enough so the blade only grazed Boone's shoulder. The dog yelped, but kept his jaws clamped on Josh's forearm. That was when I saw thick, black liquid oozing from the wounds, like swamp muck, not blood. It dribbled onto the leaves. Josh wrenched his arm free with a strength that felt impossible. He raised the knife for another stab. Without thinking, I fumbled for my belt and pulled out a small folding knife. I slashed blindly at Josh's abdomen, feeling resistance as the blade bit into flesh. He roared in that same double-voiced tone and recoiled, staggering backward. More black water poured from the wound, staining his shirt. He glared at me with a hateful, alien expression. "She just wants the dog," he hissed. "Why do you fight?" Panicked, I grabbed Boone and scrambled backward. My mind raced. I'd heard old stories about spirits or entities that needed a sacrifice, but it all seemed too insane for real life. Yet, there we were. Josh advanced. His posture was odd, hunched, as if his bones were rearranging. The wind carried the distant sound of a woman's laughter from somewhere near the river. I could barely breathe. Boone bared his teeth, refusing to back down, but I knew we were in mortal danger. In a flash of clarity, I remembered something about reflections and curses. Some local lore I'd read years ago about a spirit in the Sipsy swamps who could be wounded through her reflection. It was a superstition, but I was desperate enough to try anything. I turned my flashlight onto Josh, noticing how his shadow stretched behind him. I wondered if I could lure the creature to the water's edge. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a shape gliding across the river's surface, tall, spindly, with arms too long. It was like a woman, but impossibly thin, wearing tattered rags that dragged through the water. Her face was a skull with skin pulled tight, and her hair floated around her like an underwater current. My mouth went dry. This was Maud, I realized. The swamp hag. She whispered my name, a hissing echo that seemed to come from every direction. I could see her reflection shimmering on the river's black surface. Boone growled, but he was limping from the knife graze. Josh lunged again, and I ducked, but he managed to slice a shallow cut along my arm. The pain shot through me, spurring me into action. I kicked at his legs, knocking him off balance. For a moment, he collapsed onto one knee, the black water pulsing out of his wounds, staining the ground. Seizing my chance, I sprinted toward the riverbank, half dragging Boone. I wanted to get close to Maud's reflection. Maybe I could do something. Maybe I could wound her through it. Josh stumbled after me, howling in that dual voice. Maud's form was just a few yards from shore, gliding on the surface. She reached a skeletal arm toward me, those elongated fingers flexing. Her reflection wavered in the dark water, and I saw her face. A hollow, eyeless visage with a mouth wide open in a silent scream. I fumbled for my folding knife, the blade slick with Josh's black ooze. With a trembling hand, I raised it and plunged it into the reflection in the water, aiming right for where her heart would be. It was an insane gamble, but the moment the blade broke the surface, Maud screeched. It was an ear-splitting, layered scream that sent waves rippling outward. I felt like my brain was shuddering inside my skull. Her body convulsed, limbs bending in unnatural angles. She flailed, sank halfway into the water and vanished beneath the swirling black surface. Behind me, Josh emitted a furious cry. He clutched his chest, staggering. The black water gushed from his wounds, and for a heartbeat his eyes flickered back to normal. I saw raw fear on his face. "Nate?" he gasped in his own voice. Then he collapsed, body twisting as if something were being pulled out of him. I watched, paralyzed, as he sank face first into the muddy bank. For a moment, the only sound was the rush of the river and my own ragged breath. I knelt beside him, rolling him over, half expecting him to attack again, but he was limp. I checked for a pulse. None. His eyes stared at me, empty, and a final trickle of black fluid seeped from his mouth. I felt a wave of horror crash over me. This man, who'd been alive and normal just a day ago, was now dead, corrupted by something unnatural. A splash made me look up. Maud's hand, or what was left of it, broke the surface of the water before sinking again. I could almost feel her hatred radiating toward me. The air seemed to vibrate with tension, as though the forest was holding its breath. Boone whined, limping at my side. He was bleeding, but not profusely. I gathered him up, adrenaline pounding. I knew we had to get out of there immediately. We didn't bother packing anything. I grabbed my battered backpack with one hand, still unsure if anything inside was usable. With the other, I guided Boone, supporting him so he could walk. I fled the camp, leaving the tent and Josh's body behind. At some point, the sky began to lighten, or so I thought, but my watch read midnight. The forest felt warped, as if time had lost meaning. We stumbled across uneven terrain, crossing shallow streams and stepping around tree roots that seemed to grasp at our ankles. I stopped only once, to wrap Boone's shoulder wound with a strip of clean cloth from my bag. The dog panted heavily, but he kept moving, driven by whatever primal survival instinct told him to escape that cursed place. We pressed on for hours, or minutes, I truly couldn't tell. My watch flickered from 10 a.m. to 4:50 p.m. and back. At times, I thought I saw faint sunlight through the trees, only for it to vanish as if a cloud had devoured it. Finally, we stumbled onto a trail that looked more like a proper path, though I couldn't say how we got there. My sense of direction was shot, but the terrain flattened out and the trees spaced wider, letting in more moonlight. Or was it daylight? The sky had taken on a strange pale quality, neither bright nor dark. Fear drove me forward. I half expected to see Maud gliding behind us, her impossibly tall figure weaving through the trunks. I kept glancing over my shoulder, but all I saw were shadows. Once, I thought I spotted a tall silhouette that vanished when I blinked. Eventually, we heard something new. The distant hum of a car engine. My spirit soared. I pushed through the undergrowth, ignoring the branches that snagged my arms, ignoring my exhaustion. If there was a road, or even a small parking lot, that meant civilization. We emerged onto a gravel lot, the very same one where I'd parked my SUV. It startled me so much I almost dropped Boone's harness, because, according to my watch, it was only 3 hours since I'd arrived. But that was impossible. It felt like days had passed. My SUV was still there, the only car in the lot. A thin layer of dust on the windshield. I rushed to the driver's side, trying to keep Boone steady. When I got in, the dashboard clock read 9:07 a.m., but the sun was nowhere near mid-morning height. The sky was a dull gray, as if it were early dawn or late evening. I turned the key. The engine coughed to life. My hands shook so badly I struggled to shift into drive. Boone lay down in the back seat, whimpering. I stroked his fur, reassuring him we were safe now, but I wasn't sure I believed it. We drove. The road was bumpy and winding, but eventually the forest thinned, and we reached the main highway. As I approached the first sign of civilization, the sky abruptly brightened, like switching from one channel to another. My dashboard clock read 9:10 a.m., meaning only 3 minutes had passed. Yet I felt days older, battered, changed. I noticed something else about Boone. He sat up, ears perked forward, gazing out the window with an intensity I'd never seen in him before. He wasn't trembling like he'd been moments ago. Instead, he was eerily calm, like the primal fear had evaporated. His eyes seemed darker somehow, the usual warmth replaced by a deep wariness. Part of me wanted to drive straight to a hospital for both of us, but as I passed the city limits, something told me that doctors wouldn't be able to help with this kind of trauma. Instead, I headed home. When I pulled into my apartment complex, the morning sun was shining normally. My phone, still dead, clattered on the passenger seat. My watch read 6:45 a.m. I didn't even care anymore. Time had broken for me in those woods, and my mind was too exhausted to question it further. Inside my apartment, Boone walked gingerly to his water bowl. I could see dried blood matted in his fur. I fetched the first aid kit from my bathroom and carefully cleaned and bandaged his shoulder. He didn't resist, just stared at me with those unsettlingly dark eyes. I showered, half expecting black water to run from my own wounds, but only normal red blood seeped from the knife cut on my arm. My mind kept flashing to Josh's final expression, the black fluid leaking out of him. I scrubbed until my skin felt raw, yet I couldn't wash away the memory. Boone refused to leave my side. Normally, after a stressful situation, he'd pace or whine, or eventually lie down and wag his tail when I spoke to him. But now, he was quiet. He followed me from room to room, never wagging his tail, barely blinking. His stare was unwavering, and I sensed he was changed, just like I was. Whatever had happened out there, we didn't escape unscathed. It wasn't until I checked the time again, a normal clock on the wall, that I realized I had no idea what day it was anymore. The clock read 7 a.m., meaning I'd been gone for about 24 hours total. That was impossible, given everything we experienced, yet the contradictory times from my watch and car's dashboard had left me uncertain. I fed Boone some fresh food, but he only sniffed it, then walked away. I poured it out, replaced it with something else, and still he refused. Finally, hours later, he lapped at some water, but he never touched the food. I called the local ranger station to report what happened. Of course, I omitted the more supernatural details and simply said I'd encountered a disturbed hiker named Josh who attacked me and might still be out there. The person on the line sounded concerned but also puzzled. They took my information, promising to send someone to check the area. Days passed. I waited for a follow-up call, but none came. No official statements, no news articles about a missing man or a discovered body. One evening, out of desperation, I phoned the station again. They claimed they'd found no signs of a hiker matching the description or even a campsite. One ranger told me I might have gotten lost in a different section of the forest entirely, or that perhaps this Josh had found his way out. I felt a swirl of guilt and terror. Did I leave him there to rot by the river? But what was I supposed to do? He'd been possessed by that thing. He was already long gone before I delivered the final blow. At night, I woke in cold sweats, hearing the hiss of a woman's voice calling my name, "Nate, come back." Sometimes I'd bolt upright and see Boone staring at me from the corner of the room, his eyes glinting in the faint streetlight seeping through the blinds. If I reached out to him, he'd come closer, pressing his head against my hand, but he never wagged his tail. He didn't seem like my old Boone. I tried taking him to the vet to check his wound and his behavioral changes, but the tests all came back normal. The vet said physically he seemed healthy, though the cut on his shoulder was a bit infected, which they treated. They couldn't explain his sudden change in demeanor. One night, about a week later, I was sitting on my couch staring at a blank TV screen, turning the events over in my head for the 1,000th time. That was when my phone, which I'd left on the kitchen counter, suddenly vibrated. I jumped to my feet and rushed to check it. The screen was black, but the device hummed once. I pressed the power button. Nothing. Then the phone vibrated again as if receiving a call. Heart pounding, I put it to my ear. Faint static hissed. Then, in my own voice, I heard, "You should have let her take the dog first." I dropped the phone. It clattered against the counter, the screen flickering, then going dark. I stood there, trying to calm the wild beating of my heart. My mind spun with horror. That was my voice, but I'd never said those words. Boone padded into the kitchen, staring at me with unblinking eyes. For a long moment, we just stood there, man and dog, both scarred by something we couldn't name. I still don't sleep well. The corners of my vision sometimes catch glimpses of a tall, spindly silhouette. The nights feel longer. Boone paces the apartment, occasionally letting out a low growl as if warning invisible presences to keep their distance. I look at the black scabbed scar on his shoulder, and the memory of Maud's reflection in the water burns in my mind. I can't say if I truly crippled her or if she's just biding her time, waiting for another chance. Some days, I consider returning to the Sipsy, if only to find closure. But deep down, I suspect that's exactly what she wants, what she whispered for. So, I stay away, and I keep Boone close, even though sometimes I catch him staring at me with an expression that's almost knowing, like he carries a fragment of that swamp darkness in him. Sometimes I wonder if he's still entirely my dog, or if part of Maud's essence clings to him like a parasite, a link she could use to slither back into our lives. No matter how many times I tell myself it was just hallucinations, stress, or nightmares brought on by real dangers in the wilderness, I can't shake the certainty of what I saw and felt. The phone that died and came back at the worst possible moment, the GPS that spat out nonsense, the rotted food in my backpack, the flickering, impossible fire, Josh's slow transformation, the black water gushing from his wounds, and the way time itself twisted in that cursed place. I haven't told anyone else the full truth. Who would believe me? I can't even process it myself. But I know what I heard in the final moments as I drove away from the Sipsy, the voice crackling through my car's radio in static, sounding like my own voice, but layered with something older and crueler. You should have let her take the dog first. I have no idea how much time truly passed out there, or what part of me might have stayed behind. But something definitely followed me home. Maybe it's just the memories, the trauma, or maybe it's something more tangible. Something that's burrowed into Boone's darkened eyes. Either way, I know that the events in the Sipsy wilderness weren't just the result of my imagination. The forest is ancient, and there are things in it that defy our mundane explanations. If you ever find yourself tempted to go deep into those woods for solitude or a challenge, I beg you, go with caution. Listen to your instincts, and if you feel something calling your name from the water, do not answer. Some nights, I wake up with the taste of muddy water on my tongue, and in those moments, I swear I hear Boone growling at the bedroom door, as if holding something at bay, a shape in the darkness, tall and silent, waiting just beyond the threshold. That's why I'm writing this all down now, because if anything happens, I want someone to know. I want someone to understand why I might disappear without a trace, or why my dog might be found with eyes that don't belong in this world. Maybe then they'll seal off that section of the Sipsy, or leave a warning sign to keep people out. But then again, maybe it won't make a difference. Maud will always need to feed. She'll always be hungry. And she'll whisper your name if you're foolish enough to walk those trails alone.